Good evening, everybody. This is Professor Mani welcoming you on behalf of the Bombay Management Association. Today is a special evening for us with the BMA CSR Conclave, as we had titled it. And to lead this entire conclave, we have none other than the eminent Dr. Ganesh Natarajn, who himself is a name, an institution, and a role model in the field of CSR and social enterprise. As many of us know, Dr. Ganesh Natarajn is a doyen from the IT industry, but the way he has dedicated his life with a mission over the last decade plus in the field of social enterprise, I think it's been a great role model for every one of us. Bombay Management Association has been part of the All India Management Association and is about 65 years old. Since the lockdown began in the month of April, we have migrated completely to the digital platform to offer various services to our members. I'm this evening that over the last 7 months, we have done close to 70 webinars on various topics related to self-development, management development, wellness, which is so very important in today's scenario of post-corona and the unlock period, and tried to look at various aspects of digitalization, human resource management, and today, of course, social enterprise. A few weeks later, we plan to have a conclave on environment, safety, and governance. So to sum up, BMA is looking at providing value-added learning services to its members through the digital platform at this given point in time. Our deep gratitude to Dr. Ganesh Natarajn, who has been part of the BMA family for several years. We can't think of an year in the BMA history where Ganesh has not led some conference or some event or been the keynote speaker at any one of our programs. Many of you may know that he is also part of the All India Management Association Council and therefore steers a lot of initiatives in the field of management development from there. I want to place on record our gratitude to CIPLA Foundation and ITM group of institutions for the support that they have provided us in the form of sponsorship to organize this particular conclave. We have a record number of 190 registrations, but they often say in the digital world, people bunk more frequently than classroom bunking. So let's wait and watch how many actually end up here. But I'm confident with the lineup of speakers that Ganesh has organized for us in support with Uma and the entire team of Ganesh, we expect at least to hit a century by evening if one is reminding you of the IPL days. On that note, let me once again reiterate that this is a journey which we are trying to explore as to what companies have done in the field of social enterprise, what institutions have done in this field, what kind of talent is already available here doing wonderful work, how do we still harness more talent in time to come? Because the biggest challenge that social enterprise is going to face is we need committed, sincere people who are ready to put in their full energies. The reason I said energies was very often people plan a second innings in the social enterprise segment. And therefore, sometimes we end up meeting a lot of people who are very sincere, dedicated, but I think they are sorry to say burnt out or past their prime. And this perhaps is the biggest challenge India is going to face, not only attracting talent in corporates, but attracting talent in social enterprise. These and some success stories from corporates, from social enterprises is what we have weaved for all of you this evening. Thank you everyone for being part of this learning journey with BMA. And on that note, I'd like to hand over to our conclave chairperson, the eminent Dr. Ganesh Natarajn. Over to you, Ganesh.
Thank you very much, Professor Mani. And for my friends and our speakers and chairs who haven't met Professor Mani before, I mean, he himself is an icon of academic as well as professional excellence. I know him for many years. I mean, from the time he has been leading some very big initiatives in the ITM group of institutions, and of course, in the whole management association network in India. And I think he's providing some great leadership for one of the premier management associations, which is the Bombay Management Association. So very quickly, why? Because you may argue that what's the Bombay Management Association got to do with the social sector? We believe there is tremendous amounts to be looked at. I was just chatting with a few people before we started. I have many, many friends who have run very large corporations, who have been very active in academics, in the military, in the Indian administrative services. And many of them are saying that, look, I mean, it's no longer a situation where all of us want to finish our active lives at the age of 58 or 60 or whatever. And there's tremendous amount of value we can add back. And we're actually now working with many people to say, how can you post maybe a corporate or a military or a farming or an administrative service career? How can you really add value to the social sector? So we actually wanted to bring this from a very unique perspective, saying that, look, how do we bring corporate experience? How do we certainly bring very substantial initiatives that are happening in the social sector? And how do we build corporate supporters together? And that's the reason for these 3 sessions. I'm conscious, in fact, many people said, look, oh, we can't attend the session. So we have started recording it. It'll be available to every member of BMA or anybody who wants to look at it later. And even if some of you who are here now want to step out for maybe an hour or so, we'll happily send you the recording. So not to worry about missing anything. Very quickly to frame this, I think most of you know that the UN General Assembly in September 2015 came up with an agenda for sustainable development, which is called the 2030 Agenda. And why they said 2030 is they set up 17 sustainable development goals. And they said if these goals are achieved, we would probably be in a better position to build a better planet. I won't go through the 17. I mean, any of you can Google SDGs and you'll find it. But what is important for our discussion today is some of the goals. The goal number 4 is quality education. All of us know, particularly in India, that education can touch abysmal levels in some rural parts of the country and even in some urban locations. The second, of course, which I think has become even more important thanks to COVID and job losses and wage losses, etc., is SDG 8, which is called decent work and economic growth. Economic growth is still a hunt as far as India is concerned, but certainly we owe it to members of our community to look at decent work and economic growth happening. The third, which I think the smart cities movement in India has started to look at, which is SDG 11, which is sustainable cities and community. And I mean, I've been very fortunate to be part of an entity which my colleague and CEO, Ruchi Mathur, will speak about later, called the Lighthouse Communities Foundation. And we were delighted when in the Smart Cities Conclave 3 years back, we were chosen for extreme success in social. And we were delighted because when you think smart cities, you think it's all about technology and digital. But I think we have taken a very holistic view of how do you really build sustainable cities. So that's 11. The most important, obviously, are the first and the second sustainable goals, which is one is no poverty and second is zero hunger. Sadly, in our country, we are still a while away. In fact, there is a belief that nearly 50 million of our countrymen have been pushed further into poverty thanks to, I think, the last 7 months of problem. And we certainly owe it to them to do whatever little we can or as much as we can to make that better for them. So what are we here for? We are here primarily for Sustainable Development Goal number 17, which is partnerships to achieve the goals. And what I want you to listen to right through this session is what are those virtuous partnerships between various entities which can come together and make these changes happen. First of all, I'd like to thank all the speakers and chairpersons of the panels, because I mean, I have a hope that whoever I invite to lead or speak will agree. And here we had 100% record. I mean, nobody said I'm too busy thanks to COVID. Nobody said that, look, I have to come back from office. So I think we've been very successful that everybody we wanted here is actually here. So thank you very much. A big shout out to each one of you for that. So let me quickly introduce you to the chairperson of the first discussion, which is my very good friend, Mark Jankelson. Mark, of course, is a chairperson or chairman of Social Venture Partners in Melbourne. And I'm glad that we have quite a few SVP India members also joined, including one of our board directors, Murali Shivraman. And Mark has over 35 years of global experience in people management, 14 of this at CEO level and management consulting. He has served as an advisor to boards and chief executives and has a very strong affinity with entrepreneurship because he grew up and worked in his family's business in South Africa as part of his early career. He currently runs, along with his wife, a commercial walnut business. Yes, a walnut business with orchards in central Victoria and southern New South Wales. He's based in Melbourne, as I mentioned earlier, and is a senior fellow at the Center for Ethical Leadership at Melbourne University and a partner with the KBA Consulting Group, which is a value-based strategy and organization development consulting. He's graduated from Rhodes University and has an MBA from the BITS Business School in South Africa. I'm very also delighted that Gururaj Desh Deshpande, I mean, you all call him Desh affectionately, who's the president and chairman of the Sparta Group LLC, based out of Boston. He could also join us today. And Desh, of course, is actually a legendary figure in the technology industry worldwide and has pursued an entrepreneurial career for the last 3 decades. He was involved as a founder, a founding investor, or chairman of several companies. The ones that I know very intimately are Cascade Communications, Sycamore Networks, Coral Networks, Tejas Networks, and now has a very successful and a very meaningful career in the social sector, exactly as I mentioned earlier. Desh lives in Boston, serves as a life member of the MIT Corporation, and his support has made possible MIT's Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation. Not only that, I think his work on strengthening social ecosystems for significant social and economic impact has leveraged from MIT Center the setup of nearly 5 other centers. There is one in India, there's one in the University of New Brunswick in Canada, there is Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, the Gopal Krishnan Deshpande Center for Innovation, and the center they have at the IIT Madras in India. So Desh does, I mean, tremendous work, and you'll hear about it as he speaks. And Desh has also co-chaired the National Council to support President Obama's innovation and entrepreneurship strategy from 2010 to 2015. So as you can see, I think we have a very interesting conversation to follow. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Ganesh. That was a lovely introduction, and appreciate all the comments. In this session, what we are going to attempt to do is to focus in on the notion of scaling. And Desh and I are going to have a chat, and Ganesh, we're going to draw you in as well. What is it that we can learn from scaling corporate enterprises that's transferable into the social sector? It's very clear we know what the problems are. You alluded to a number of them, Ganesh, earlier. We also know that there are a lot of passionate people who want to deal with those problems, but it's not good enough to just do good. What we want is impact, and we're seeking outcomes. And I think that is a challenge for a lot of people who move from the corporate sector into the social sector, is to appreciate that there are some similarities and there are some big differences, because the other thing we know about social enterprise is that what really works is proximity to the problem. So getting the people who are involved in the issues to actually work on them, which is a bit different to the corporate sector. So what I'm going to do is have a chat to Desh. First of all, Desh, tell us a bit about your more recent work in the social sector. What is it you're trying to do, and how you're leveraging your thinking from your experience as a venture capitalist into the work that you're doing? That would be good to start with, and then we'll move on to drawing out some interesting differences that you have observed between the social sector and the corporate sector.
Thank you, Mark. Like most of the people on the call here, I came out of the for-profit sector, building companies and so on. And it's only last 15 years that I've sort of really gotten involved with people more at the bottom of the economic pyramid. And what's different is the thing that you summarized. I think most of us who work in the for-profit sector, the big advantage that the for-profit sector has is that, doesn't matter how crazy your idea is, within a year, 2 years, 3 years, you have to come up with a solution for which somebody is willing to pay. And they better pay more than what it costs you. And if that happens, then you have a sustainable business. But it's very competitive, because people who buy this thing have disposable income, and they can pick and choose whom they want to buy it from. And therefore, it's very competitive. So in the for-profit sector, execution excellence is given. If you blink, you die. And therefore, I think most of us on the call, really know how to execute. But then when you go to the other segment, where people at the bottom of the pyramid, they're just struggling to get through the day. And so you cannot start with execution excellence. You have to start with compassion. You have to co-create the solution with them. And also, it's sometimes, I think most of us who come from the for-profit sector, we are very good in strategy and ideas. And so we always want to lead with some good solution, a silver bullet that's going to solve the problem. But then it's like trying to design a product for a customer that you don't understand. When people are just struggling to get through the day and you're trying to bring about a change in their lives, it's hard because they don't have a balance sheet. Their whole assets would be just a little piece. And so any change in life is risky. And that's the risk that they cannot assume. And so I think people from the for-profit sector, if they can develop that compassion and ability to understand and co-create the solution with these people, but at the same time, not lose the sharp edge on the execution. So if you can bring execution excellence to the nonprofit sector and the compassion to the for-profit sector, I think we can make a substantial difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk a bit about how you're using those ideas in the work that you're doing with your foundation. Talk a little about that.
Okay, so I can tell you about two extreme examples. The example of what I'm doing in Boston with MIT, and what I'm doing in India with what we call the Social Innovation Sandbox. It's centered around Hubli in Karnataka, halfway between Bangalore and Mumbai. So in MIT, it's all about innovation. And then you take that innovation and you direct it to some burning problem that people have, you'll have an impact. And that's the economy that has developed over the last 40, 50 years nicely. And so if you come up with a solution that people that have disposable income have, then it's more than likely that you'll be successful. Now, to implement, so it's really innovation plus relevance is equal to impact. So the work that we started in India, where we started with the very bottom, there we understood that it's really relevance plus innovation is equal to impact. And initially, for the first 10 years or so, we were primarily grant makers, like a venture capitalist. We funded about 183 different organizations and tried to help them scale. A few of them scale, like Akshay Patra, Agastya, and so on. But the learning in that process was that the nonprofits really don't have a good balance sheet. Because they don't have a balance sheet, it's very hard for them to keep up with any improvement. So they're lucky if they get to version 1.0, which actually solves a problem. But then they will never go to version 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, which is what you do in business all the time, because you have to get cheaper, better, faster, right? So the new thing that I'm trying to do is first you start with co-creating the solution with the people who need the solution. You build capacity, and then you continuously inject innovation, new things, make things better. And so it's almost like R&D for the social sector. And as you keep building on it, you come up with solutions that are more sustainable. How do you make them financially sustainable? There's only three sources of income whenever you try to help somebody. Either it's a free market economy, in which case the beneficiary pays for the whole thing, or it's government program, because government is the biggest investor in that sector, or a very broad-based charity, or a combination of all the three. But you need to sort of figure out that model upfront so that you can actually start, building the program so that you can actually scale and continuously keep up with it. There's always improvements to be made. You can always make things cheaper, better, faster. And so I think, so those are some of the concepts that people on this call need to bring to the social sector, including the CSR. The CSR people are not used to investing in those platforms, R&D platforms. They're happy investing in interventions. You say,
yeah.
I'll do this, and they'll fund you.
Yeah. So Desh, one of the things you shared with me when we had a chat was your approach to the issue of water and farmers. Could you share a bit of that example, because I think that really brings to life what you're talking about.
Yeah, so that's an example of how we're working on probably about 10 different programs in scaling agriculture, entrepreneurship, and micro-entrepreneurship. But this, the agriculture is all about increasing the income of the farmer. And it turns out that one of the biggest multiplier of income for farmers is water. And so 2013, I remember when Ratan had come to Hubli, Ratan Tata, we were talking about it, and we said, there is, on a bad year, you get 60 centimeters of rain in the area that we work. But people don't have water when they need it. So that's considered a drought. That's a lot of water. And you have places like Israel where you get maybe 2 inches of water and they manage it. And so we said, and also, unfortunately, the communities are not sophisticated enough to use public properties, right? So we said, why don't we create a private farm pond where you dig a hole that's 100 feet by 100 feet by 12 feet in 5-acre land that the farmer owns, so it's his property, and that can irrigate about 5 acres of land and double and triple the income. So we did about 150 farm ponds first couple of years, which is more R&D. And then over the last 6 years, we've done 6,000 of those, where the farmer actually pays 55,000, we pay 25,000. So next month, we are launching a program for 100,000 of these, which is the 800 crore rupee program, where the farmer pays 20,000. We get him a loan from a bank for 60,000. And then we do everything we need to do to make sure that he makes more money and pays it back in 2 years. So that's an example. And what happens is, in each of those stages, you get an opportunity to inject more and more technology, more platforms, more financial engineering, and so on, all the skills that you learn in the for-profit sector. But you can't start there. You do have to go through this pain of co-creating the solution, knowing exactly what people need and everything else. And then you start injecting all the capabilities that you can bring to the solutions.
That's a wonderful illustration. And I'm smiling because my own experience has been, the impatience to get on with doing things, when really what you've shown is a lot of patience to figure out what really can work and then build as you go. Maybe I can draw Ganesh in here, because Ganesh, have had some interesting experiences with education, and maybe you just want to talk about some of your experiences in applying your understanding of entrepreneurship into the social sector.
Thanks, Mark. As you know, wisdom is often 20/20 hindsight. So when I look back on my own years, almost 25 years of running 2 companies. One was a company called Aptech right there in Mumbai. And then, of course, a company called Zensar Technologies, which was headquartered in Mumbai, but was primarily out of Pune and the US. And if you really think about it, any entrepreneur, I'm sure Desh will agree, and you will agree, Mark, and so many others in this group will agree. If you think of a successful enterprise that scales, one is, of course, it has to have a great idea. The power of the idea, as we call it, is significant. The second is, of course, it has to have a business model, because that seed of an idea has to be able to take root and then flower and then bear fruit. And that business model becomes extremely important. The third, as we always say, is the power of the team, because unless you have a team with complementary skills who can really make stuff happen, it doesn't really scale. The fourth nowadays is people who are in an advisory or a board capacity. So having a strong board, a board of advisors, a board of directors, I think all that becomes extremely important. And of course, the most important, as we all know, is money. Because at the end of the day, whether it's a social enterprise, whether it's a not-for-profit, or it's a large corporate, I think if you are constantly worried about money, you'll cut corners. You will not deliver the kind of value your customer needs, and that's going to be different. So I think if you take that model and apply it, I started off my early ventures in philanthropy at the age of 12 or 13, because I grew up in a little village called Tatisilwai near Ranchi in Jharkhand. And right from the time I was in class 6 or 7, I think when we came back from school, we used to literally dump our school bags and run off to a social sector. It's really a social center called a Seva Kendra, which in English means a help center. My dad was running for the villages around. There were 6 villages around where we lived. And all the children would come there and, we would actually collaborate. I mean, the whole concept of equity, inclusion, I think it's kind of ingrained in the kind of work we did in those days. After that, of course, like everybody else in this country, I mean, the struggle for legitimacy got me for the next maybe 20, 25 years. And I mean, it's only probably when I was 37 or 38 and halfway through my tenure running AppTech, that it really struck me that, look, the time had come to give back. And one of our great founding fathers of India, Mahatma Gandhi, he has a wonderful saying that says the world has enough for everybody's needs, but not enough for everybody's greed. And it kind of, even today, it's a very big part of the way I think, because we really believe that, look, most of us have enough for our needs. I mean, most of us on this call, but are we really concerned about just making more of the same because that's what we're good at? Or is there something we can do to change our lifestyle, change our giving habits, move into philanthropy and make that happen? So this was my guiding theme. And over the years, in fact, I was privileged to run not only the IT Industry Association, NASSCOM, in 2008, but then for 3 years, I was also the chair of NASSCOM Foundation, where we could work with, the big banks, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and really bring some great capital to work in India, right from restoring libraries across the country. I mean, many of you will remember going to a library in your youth, but where is it today? I mean, we talk about digital libraries, but people still like to go to a library, leaf through the books. And unfortunately, even the Barnes and Nobles and the bookstores are going out of fashion. So we said, let's revive those. And we did a lot of interesting projects there. After I finished my tenure in Zensar is when I kind of went into 4 pathways. The first, of course, was our own family foundation, which Uma and I run. And that is clearly something that is very motivating for us because we're doing work in various states, just helping young people to find their reason for existence, if you will. And also working with some of the banks, including, of course, Shanta, who's here on this group, and trying to build big projects in the social sector. So I think that's something that we're very proud of. On a scale basis, I mean, I co-founded an entity called Pune City Connect, which has recently morphed into something called the Lighthouse Communities Foundation. And as I said, Ruchi is the CEO, and she's going to talk about it in the next session. But there we discovered, the power of what we call agency in the social sector. That, there is, unfortunately in this country, as many of you will know, the whole skills initiative in this country has not been really successful. And in spite of a lot of money, a Ministry of Skills and Entrepreneurship or the government of India, but we haven't seen too much of credibility or too much of success through skills. And when we did research on that, and I have a lot of people who work with me and, we've worked as partners in skills in Western India. Meher Padamji, who's the third chairperson of Thermax, Rati Forbes, who's currently the Social Venture Partners Pune chair and private. Of course, she's part of a family company called Forbes Marshall. And we've done these experiments. And we discovered the real reason was that, look, we were all in our superior wisdom as well-off people, if you will, creating these centers saying, okay, I'll set up a plumbing training center or I'll set up a retail training center. And then we said, look, since we're doing it free, everybody should actually just flock and be very happy with free education. The net reality is that you find that hardly 12-15% of the people you train actually take up a job. And out of those 15%, 50% of them drop out within 3 months. So imagine the wastage of good intent as well as good money in something like this. So when we started Pune City Connect, and that was a public-private partnership with the Pune Municipal Corporation, we said, the first 20% of what we do should be to discover agency of youth. We have close to 600 slum communities in the city of Pune. And we're actually working in the 15 municipal wards and saying, how can we bring these people to entities that we call, whether it's digital literacy centers, skills lighthouses, and really build the agency and then look at what skills they really want to acquire. Because if somebody chooses a skill by themselves, it's more likely to succeed than if you decide that this is a skill for that person. So this is one moment of epiphany we've had, and I'm sure Ruchi will elaborate on how we work with technology, with people, with mentors and everything else as we go along. The other one I'm very excited about, which again is represented in the second panel, so that's Educate Girls. It's actually a large entity called Foundation for Educating Girls Globally. And I mean, we're working on a mission of putting 17 million, that's 1.7 crore rural girls back to school. I mean, most of you know that, look, unfortunately in our country, girls tend to drop out of school very early. Even today, there are, I mean, girls at the age of 13 and 14 and 15 and 16 getting married even before they are able to even consciously choose for themselves. And one of the missions obviously was to put as many girls back to school. And in that process, other youth, not necessarily girls, would benefit because you would be taking over villages, taking over schools, taking over and putting in lots of technology. Today, we're working on artificial intelligence technology, which can actually predict based on attendance when a rural girl in Pali, Rajasthan might drop out of school. So it's very exciting to see that, look, entities like this, and this has a, I mean, very eminent board. In fact, Miranda, who's the next panel chair and moderator, he's been on the board for a long time. And, you know, many of us really enjoy working with this because there's so much of professionalism. And to answer your question, Mark, what I've really learned is, I mean, anybody who believes that the social sector is all heart and no mind and no scaling is making a mistake. Because most successful, Desh mentioned Akshay Patra. Desh himself is doing it in Hubli. What we are doing with Pune City Connect, now Lighthouse's foundation, what we're doing with Educate Girls is all stories of scale, which we will bring to you as we go along this evening. Last but not the least, I joined the board of an entity called Asian Venture Philanthropy Network just a year ago. And that's an amazing model of partnerships. Okay, it's been around for maybe 12 years, but in the last 3 years, every philanthropic organization worth the name from the US, from Europe, when they look at Asia, I mean, unless of course you have the connects already like Desh has, for instance, they'll come through a platform model that we've created in the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network. And that platform is really, really scaling. So we have something called a deal share platform where anybody who has a need, a social enterprise or a great philanthropy idea can come in there. I mean, you'll be amazed. We did our annual conference on a similar platform to what we're doing today, just about 5 months back. And last year it was in Singapore, where we had close to 1,500 people participating. And this year we weren't sure. I mean, a social summit, I mean, how many people will we really get? 6,800 people signed up for that conference. And quite a large portion of it attended multiple tracks, environment, livelihoods, education, what have you. So the reason I'm saying this is, there is a real need we are finding for people to say, let's build scale in the social sector. You and I, Mark, have seen it ourselves in Social Venture Partners. I mean, today, the kind of work we're doing in Social Venture Partners internationally, which is what we call building a reimagined fund, you know, where we can actually reimagine the equity problems in the world. In America, of course, it's Black Lives Matter. In India, it could be what I just mentioned, the plight of the girl child. In various parts of the world, it's different. But at the end of the day, we have to reimagine a society where there is inclusion, there is dignity for all, there is equity, and how do we make these happen? So I'm sorry for the long answer, but I'm saying it's not just education, it's not just livelihood, it's not just environment. I think we have to build models that can scale, attract the right capital, attract the right people, and then it really scales. And that's our learning from large corporates and how do you move that into the social sector.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ganesh. You've drawn out some interesting themes that I wanted to pursue. One of those is collaboration. So, you know, we hear a lot about collaboration and intent to collaborate, but we don't see really enough of that. And Desh, you and I talked a bit about that the other day. You know, perhaps I'll draw you in here, Desh. What do you think is holding people back from, we've got a great idea or set of ideas, we're achieving a level of scaling, but to go that next stage, we need to knit together more people who are doing more of the same thing to create a greater impact. What's holding people back, do you think?
Yeah. So, you know, Mark, if you look at entrepreneurs, even in the for-profit sector, they have to be slightly crazy, right, to start anything new, whether it's walnuts or anything else, because the odds are so much against you. And so it's a hard battle. And when you come to the nonprofit, it's actually 10 times harder. So the people who start nonprofits are even crazier. And there is 3.5 million of them or something in India, same number in US. And so these people are so passionate and so committed. They get something going, but then there's a lot of ownership of that whole thing. And same thing happens in companies too. People where the founders, when they get something going, a lot of them get up to, 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, but they can't scale beyond that because they are just control freaks. Like you get used to running everything yourself and you want to make every decision and so on. But in the social sector, I think if we can get people to start thinking about, because, in the for-profit, it's always market share. And so you want to make sure that you have the biggest market share in any segment that you compete in. In the social sector, you're looking for impact. You're looking for systemic impact. And you're not going to generate the systemic impact by just chipping away at a corner somewhere, right? So you have to collaborate, you have to share things and so on. So if people really open up their eyes to that bigger goal, the mission of bringing about a systemic impact, I think collaboration will become easier. Otherwise, what happens is you get a few nonprofits coming together, and of course, they're all struggling just to survive. They have enough cash flow for maybe 2-3 months of payroll. So immediately, they're all fighting for that funding. So whenever there's, whenever 2, 3, 4 people come together, everybody is fighting for that little pot of money. And so it just tends to be extremely competitive in terms of collaborating to create that systemic impact. So I think people who come from the for-profit sector with bigger resources, whether it's CSR money or anything else, need to make sure that they're the facilitators of that collaboration.
Yep. Do you have any idea about how to unlock that? I mean, I'll just share with you. I have quite a good example in Australia, an organization that my group is working with. One of the biggest issues in the rural areas is youth mental health and suicide. It's multiples bigger than in the cities. And one of the organizations we're working with has come up with a very unique and powerful model, which they are scaling. But my sense is all the conversations we have are about their thinking about being limited by their own resources. And there is an opportunity to go above that and say, what if we could take this to the whole world? What would that look like? And what needs to change in order for that to happen? Both of you, what do you think can unlock that kind of thinking? You've got a couple of good examples of where you're doing that in agriculture and education, Ganesh. What unlocks the thinking from we can do it here to we can solve the whole system by engaging more people? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, quick thoughts. I think what we're finding is that there are more similarities than differences. When you have a core theme, and it does transport pretty well, I mean, certainly across a country and even across the world, for instance. I mean, I remember I was in Ho Chi Minh City in Hanoi last year, speaking at the Horasis conference. And we actually talked to various people, including people who are advisors to the government. And I spoke about the models we are using. I mean, I spoke about agency earlier, livelihoods, etc. And we found there was tremendous interest because the issues that we are facing here, in terms of people wanting better dignity, a better quality of livelihood, etc., are similar. I mean, you go to, you mentioned to me about even around Melbourne. I mean, there should be a lot of communities which are looking at a similar aspiration in terms of a better lifestyle. If you look at US, I remember Uma and I were visiting a Social Venture Partners annual event, and we both went out to Connecticut. And we found that, if you look at what they're doing in Connecticut, they're trying to revive the whole old manufacturing industry in the US. They're getting the community colleges to skill people better so that they can revive manufacturing. So I'm saying all these are models that you can transplant. So I think we need to figure out what I said earlier, the core of the idea. If the core of the idea resonates with other communities, other parts of the country, or other parts of the world, it can easily be transported. So recently I was talking to Naina Batra, who's the chairperson of AVPN. And she was saying, okay, my God, this whole skills lighthouse model that you guys have, I mean, love to take it to the Prime Minister of Indonesia and ask him to inaugurate one in Jakarta in April. Now, this is typical Nana, all enthusiasm. But if you can make something like that happen in Vietnam, you can make something like that happen in Indonesia, there's no reason why a model like this cannot transfer. It obviously needs a lot of humility, because I mean, we're very conscious of the fact that even our government mentor, Mr. Kunal Kumar, who's the mission director of Smart Cities in Government of India. So Kunal keeps saying, guys, be very open to any new idea that may come at you. You know, somebody may have a favorite non-profit already in that particular location, and they'll want you to joint venture with them. They'll want you to partner with them. So we can't go in with a cookie cutter, one size fits all kind of model. But if you know that you will not compromise on the core of your idea, the heart and soul of the idea, then the way that becomes a body of knowledge or a body of capability, I think that can blossom in 1,000 different ways. But that's the opportunity of a scale I see in education, in healthcare, in livelihood, in a model like what Desh has in Huli, which can very easily be transported in different parts of India and Asia. So I think that's my belief and my conviction that it is.
So how do you think we solve the founder owner syndrome, which Desh talked about, and certainly has been my experience, to transcend that? I mean, I'm really interested. I've seen certainly what you've done, Ganesh, in terms of some big, hairy, audacious goals like a million jobs initiative. Does that get over the issue? What do you both of you think, Desh, about overcoming that inertia?
Yeah, no, I think it's a chicken and egg problem. So if you go to a nonprofit entrepreneur, he's doing something. First of all, it's very hard to do, and so he's struggling with resources, and so if you suddenly say, if you had more money, what would you do? He probably does not have a good answer, because he's already pitching that he's the best. You know, every nonprofit, no nonprofit ever stands up and says, you know what, I may not be as good. I'll still have room for improvement. I have room to scale. I have to get bigger, all that kind of stuff, right? So if you go to the people who have resources, they say, I can't fund you unless you have an idea. And if you go to the people who are actually working on these things, they're just struggling to get through the day themselves. And so they don't have a plan as to how they can use more resources. So we have to break that chicken and egg problem where we need social entrepreneurs who say, you know what, let me like Ganesh said, be a little bit more humble. And not only humble, it's more just survival. You know, I've never seen any nonprofit stand up and say, you know what, I'm doing good work, but I could be doing better. So can you help me get there? Because as soon as you say that, the funder will walk away. He says, oh, your thing is not perfect. I know the other guy whose program is just absolutely perfect, right? And so I think we need to bring that thinking in the sector.
And just follow on, what do you think is there a place for platforms in the social sector that will enable various organizations to scale? Desh, you've got in your own venture capital network a sort of an idea of a backbone or a platform to help people with ideas scale. And Ganesh, you mentioned platforms earlier. We haven't seen much of that in the social sector for the reasons that we talked about. Do you think there's potential for that?
Yeah, it's early stages right now, and we need some examples where those platforms really pay off big time. Otherwise, you know, it could be a platform just for the sake of platform. You invest a lot of money, you create a platform, and it doesn't go anywhere. You know, for example, Ratan, again, when I was talking to him a few years ago, he was very excited. So we have a Tata Deshpande Innovation Center where it sort of takes every program and puts it through this process and say, how can you make it better? And so I think we just need to keep developing this idea and getting more and more people engaged with it and create a few platforms where you can actually show that by investing in the platform, you can have a bigger impact. Either you can spend X rupees per intervention and help some number of people, or you can invest in platform and help even more people. But it's a little bit of a risky investment, right? Because the payoff is going to come a little later. And so we need that risk capital. And that's what, in some ways, SVP is sort of there. But I think we just need to have a few examples where that payoff is very obvious.
Is technology the opportunity?
Yeah, Mark. So if I may answer that, I mean, Mark, yeah, technology is absolutely the opportunity. In fact, the way we are now looking at, we have a big opportunity that we are chasing in one of the very large cities in India, where we have a funder. I mean, one of the 2 top funders globally who are very keen to see the whole city develop. And this is probably a 4 times larger city than Pune, where we started off our embryonic activity. And we find that they have a skills university coming up, which is actually going to recognize first workplace learning and, whatever they've learned as eventually kind of rolling up into a formal qualification. And that's where the technology platform really takes a play, because you could actually create this platform, and we are envisaging, I mean, maybe 3 or 4 core initiatives like our skills lighthouses, but working with multiple skill centers. I mean, the government there already has 25 skill centers. There are probably another 200 skill centers, really evaluate the assessment of what are their outcomes, almost like what we call in digital platforms, build these application programming interfaces, the APIs. An API connect of their skills into a credit assessment model, bring them into agency building and everything else, and then bubble them up into the lighthouse. I'm saying, we're just saying that potentially it's not just a handful of people, but maybe 5 million people can be on this platform. They can be educated and skilled anywhere, but eventually they can aspire to common goals of success. So absolutely, I think it's technology, it's willingness, it's a mindset to say, let's collaborate. So I think the collaboration team, to my mind, is what designed this entire 3 hours we're spending together, and probably is critical to the success of the social sector.
Yeah.
Mark, the other big challenge is the capacity of the people for whom you're trying to come up with all this intervention to absorb these ideas. For example, in US, it's $400 billion a year philanthropy, right? And I've been on the board of MIT, I'm the advisory board of Harvard, all these guys. Any professor here can go to any foundation and say, hey, give me $25 million, poverty solved. And actually the foundations give it to them, right? And so what happens is, and everybody wants to come up with an idea that's better than what the previous guy has done. So we have a warehouse full of these brilliant ideas that everybody has, but there's no capacity in the community for whom you're trying to design all these things to absorb these things, right? So we are underinvested in terms of building capacity within the communities that we're trying to help. And that's part of the reason why I kept MIT totally separate from the Hubli sandbox, the other place because it was such a big mismatch in terms of capabilities. Even though the compassion was there, the desire was there. But after 10 years now, they can talk like peers. And so it's beginning to make more sense. But somehow connecting competence to this connectedness is a fundamental problem that I think we somehow need to crack.
Yeah. So we've got about 5 minutes left. So I wanted to just go back to something that we started with, and you sort of got around to that, saying you can't do things to people. You have to do it with them. One of the key concepts that certainly I've learned, and I'd like to probe a bit in the social sector, is being very clear about the difference between outcomes, impact and outcomes, versus outputs. That the social sector has been very engaged in talking about outputs, how many people we put through a training program, how much food we gave to people, and so on. Instead of lifting it up another level to talk about these big outcomes that we are looking for that change lives. Just for the benefit of the audience, and particularly those in CSR, I think this is a really important issue, because it shifts the thinking from focusing on doing good, let's say, or helping people, to something bigger than that, actually changing lives and changing systems. Can both of you just have a brief comment on those ideas?
Go ahead, Desh.
Sure. Yeah. Ganesh, you want to go first?
No, please, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. You know, Mark, I think, like I said, 3 million NGOs. So people just get bombarded with these ideas, you know, why don't you do this, why don't you do that, and so on. And what happens is people actually don't trust anybody. First of all, they don't have the capacity to accept any change in the way they live, and they don't have trust. So building trust is the most important thing. And so what we have learned is that it's almost like, for example, a very simple thing like SRI technique to grow rice. You know, typically in India, people put these seeds 6 inches apart. If you put them 12 inches apart, you need 1/3 the seed, 1/3 the water, you get 40% more yield, right? But you have to do it a little differently. But it's so counterintuitive that if you go to a small farmer who makes very little money to say, hey, try this new thing, he can't take that risk. He can't do it. So what we do is we say, okay, let's do a pilot. Let's just pick 100 farmers. And we say, okay, you know, try this. I know you're going to get more and we'll help you. And in case you don't get it, we will actually compensate you at least for the amount of money that you made last year, right? So it's almost like insurance, but it's a small thing. It's a small experiment. Yeah. So what happens is slowly you have to build that trust with them. Once you build the trust with them, it's amazing as to how they sort of let you in their lives. And then they say, oh, sure, why don't we do this? Why don't we help us with education and health and something else and something else? So I think earning trust of these people and really being very, not just pushing ideas, making absolutely sure that there is impact, I think is very important.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah, just to add to that, Mark, I mean, I completely agree with the trust part. I remember when we first started Social Venture Partners in Pune 5 years ago, we met this very lovely social entrepreneur, a banker turned entrepreneur called Jaya Kale. And Mrs. Jaya Kale was, I mean, she was running for kind of abandoned women who got married too early and then came back to their homes. She was actually running a nursing assistant program. And we found that she'd been doing this phenomenally for almost 15 years and training 20 girls per year. And I remember going and talking to Jaya Kale, and then we took one of our just joined partners of Social Venture Partners with us. And he was saying, oh my God, you should do 400. And you could see it shrinking away. Who are these guys, coming and telling me how many I should do? But then me and my very esteemed colleague, Narendra Goidani Naren, we worked with her. Today, she is actually doing 400. She's doing it out of 5 centers. And once we won her trust, I mean, she spoke at our annual event in Social Venture Partners, and she's now one of the most vociferous advocates of the SVP part. So I think absolutely, Desh, you're totally right. We need to win trust. We cannot preach to a social entrepreneur. Okay. In fact, I personally believe, and so does my friend Meher Padamji, that there is much more that we from corporates can learn from social entrepreneurs than we can teach them. And then the mutuality of trust and the mutuality of learning, that really blossoms. I think that's really what I'm excited about.
Fantastic. So just in the 1 minute left, can I ask just each of you to just say, what would your message be to those people on the participants who are perhaps not in the social sector, but in CSR or wanting to be involved? What would you say to them about the best way to channel their funds and their passion? I'll start with you.
I think when we live in this world, you see problems all around you, and you have to get involved. But what happens is sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that if only they wrote a big check or just gave up their life, they can solve the problem. Unfortunately, the problems are very hard and they take a long time. So I would say, don't get too anxious and go stick your hand right inside the fire and get burnt, because then you become bitter and you're useless to yourself and to the world. Inch slowly towards the fire so that you actually enjoy the warmth. And so I would say get involved today in whatever little way that you can. so that you actually enjoy that process. You do all this just to have more fun in life, not really to help anybody else. But you have to do it. And you're not doing it right if you actually are not enjoying it. And so I would say start inching towards the fire right now. And over the course of time, you will enjoy that warmth a lot more.
That's a lovely analogy. Ganesh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say, in fact, there are 4 of my social mentors who are all 4 much younger than me, but who teach me all the time what social is all about. There's Ruchi, Mathur, who's speaking in the next one, and Amrita, who's our heart and soul of lots of stuff we do. There's Snigdha Agarwal, who runs Eastern India for Social Venture Partners, and there's Renu Khurana from Shanghai in China. Okay, and all these people have been teaching me stuff about the social sector. So I'll encapsulate it in 2 words, and I'll stop here. It's love and inclusion. It's not your money that matters. It's not how much you put in, but if you put it in with collaboration, with love, with inclusion, with the spirit of partnership, I think more success will happen than probably you set out to begin with.
Wonderful. Thank you, both of you. You've brought tremendous insights, and I hope the audience has gained some good thoughts about how they can transform the lives of people around them in an impactful way. So thank you so much, both of you. I'll hand back now to Professor Mani or is it to you, Ganesh, to introduce?
Yeah. I'm just changing my hat, so I changed my.
All right, change hats.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Desh. Thank you, Mark. It was just absolutely fabulous, and I think all of us enjoyed the conversation. And I know the participants also did, so that's good. Okay, so let's switch straight into the next panel, so that we're going to now bring in 3 amazing participants in the social sector. And to moderate or chair that panel, there's a good friend of mine, Luis Miranda. I actually, for the first time in my life, I saw Luis's resume or biodata, if you will. And Luis starts by saying something very interesting. He says, I've never been busier before. I connect the dots and spend my time with amazing not-for-profits and drive my wife nuts. And he says, I clearly have more success in the second one, the first one. So I think a lot of us probably say that. And to be more formal, Luis actually runs something very interesting called the Indian School of Public Policy, which is probably India's first 1-year postgraduate certificate program in public policy, with a partnership with the Harris School of the University of Chicago. Also, Center for Civil Society, which is a think tank that champions the ideas of markets, freedom, incentives, competition. Coro, which empowers grassroots leaders. Take Charge, Educate Girls, which I've mentioned. And others, including the 17,000 Feet Foundation in Ladakh, the Sunbird Trust of Northeast. He's part of the SBI Foundation on the board, and one of the early signatories of something that many of us are a part of, called the Living My Promise entity, where all of us have pledged to give away 50% of what we earn during our living and 50% of our wealth to charitable causes. So I think that's something that we're all very excited about. He still has a corporate role. He's senior advisor to Morgan Stanley, chairman of Manipal Cigna, and stay connected with his alma mater, which is the University of Chicago. And of course, write the occasional blog for Thrive Global India, Forbes India, etc. And mostly, like all of us, till COVID came in our path, loves to travel and hang out with kids. So he says life is good. So Luis, all yours. Make life good for us in the next 55 minutes.
Thanks, Ganesh. And thanks, Professor Mani, and thanks to the BMA for putting this together, and welcome to this panel on scaling up. I must confess right at the beginning that I'm a skeptic of scaling for the sake of scaling. I think the focus should be on genuine impact, but today we have 3 people who've scaled up very successfully. 2 of them are friends whose organizations I am connected with, Maharishi Vaishnav of Educate Girls and Ruchi Mathur of Lighthouse Communities Foundation, earlier known as the Pune City Connect. And our third speaker is Alice Gugelev, who's the Managing Director of Global Development Incubator and the CEO of GDI Africa. Alice leads initiatives to drive large social change in micro and small businesses, education, livelihoods, healthcare, etc. She was earlier at Bridgespan and at the World Bank, and in her corporate world, and actually all of us, have spent time in the corporate world before crossing over. She worked with Bain in Southeast Asia. She got an MBA from the Harvard Business School. Ruchi is the CEO of Pune City Connect, which is now known as the Lighthouse Communities Foundation. And they enable large scale impact through collaborations with local government, corporates, and NGOs, etc., and citizens. They work in the field of education, sustainable livelihoods, and digital empowerment. She got her MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. And we have Maharishi Vaishnav, who is the Chief of Staff of Educate Girls. And they work across 18,000 remote villages in Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, and Madhya Pradesh, focusing on three things: educating girls, retaining them in school, and making sure that they learn more. He also, in his private life, worked with McCann and with the Piramal Group, and he got a master's in public policy from the Gerard Ford School at the University of Michigan. So welcome to all of you guys, and why don't we get started off by each of you talking a bit about your organization, keeping in mind the panel topic about scaling. So Maharishi, I'm going to let you, since you're the only guy on this panel, I'm going to let you go kicking off first here. I'm trying to help you with the gender diversity by letting you go first. You got to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, good evening. Thanks, Ganesh and Louis. Thanks for this opportunity. So very quickly, let me start off by suggesting why we as an organization that focuses on girls' enrollment, retention, and learning exist in 2020. So, we have the Right to Education Act, and it's been a huge blessing over the last couple of decades. It's facilitated the mainstreaming of over 200 million children across the country. And despite all the kinks in the system, there is a school in every village, and it's the provider of public education across every nook and corner of the country. So, it's doing some good work. Now, despite RTE, there are certain pockets in the country where the two P's, as we call them, poverty and patriarchy, essentially force girls to miss out on their constitutionally provided right to education. And as a result of that, we are talking about very conservative figures, but there are 4 million plus girls who are eligible yet out of school in these geographically constrained pockets, largely in Rajasthan, MP, UP, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Haryana, largely in these states. Therefore, we as an organization exist. We are a 12-year-old organization. Soon we'll have our 13th foundation day in December. And as Louis mentioned, across 18,000 villages. And we have facilitated the enrollment of over 750,000 out of school girls, and improved the learning outcome of over 500,000 children. About scale. So our scale, the journey of our scale is a story of 3 acts. Act 1, where our founder, Safina, between 2007 and 2012, went to what was then the worst district in the country, Pali district in Rajasthan, and started a small pilot across 50 villages. She turned it around, went to the government and said, okay, fine, here's the result of 50 villages. Now give me more. So the government gave her 500 villages. And eventually we ended up working across the entire district of Pali. And this is where all the experimentation, all the titration of approach, happened. So that was Act 1. Act 2 was where we very, very rapidly scaled up from that single district, Pali district in Rajasthan, to 15 districts across Rajasthan and MP. And this was between 2013 and 2018. So the next 5 years of our journey. And Act 3, as we are experiencing right now, that's between 2019 and 2024, where we are not only scaling up across MP, UP, and soon next year Bihar happens, but our model too has kind of mutated over time. So we have added higher grades, adolescent girls, beyond the mandate of the Right to Education Act. We have also gone inorganically. So we have identified grassroots partners who deliver Educate Girls as model, etc. So scale up. It's been an exciting journey the last 13 years.
Thanks, Maharishi. Alice, would you like to go next? Okay, maybe maybe Alice has a slight problem. Ruchi, why don't you go?
Yeah, I think she's having a difficulty unmuting herself. So is it from the post? in any case,
Okay,
I'll go
Ruchi,
next.
yeah. Professor Mani, can someone help her in the meantime? And Ruchi, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, she's on.
Alice is unmuted. It's fine.
Okay. Okay,
Shall
Alice,
I go?
Go ahead. Yes,
Okay.
please, go ahead.
Great, thank you. And thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with all of you today. I'm calling in from Kenya. And I hope I'm not going to be too controversial on this panel, given this concept of scale. I work with a nonprofit called Global Development Incubator, and we focus, what I like to say, on the 3 S's: scale, sustainability, and systems change. And it's interesting, when I came from the for-profit world, very similar to all of you, I really thought I would leverage my banking and my strategy consulting toolkit to help nonprofits scale. When we looked, however, at the nonprofits, at least in the United States at that time, over 35 years, when you look at the number of businesses, the for-profit businesses that made it to scale, there's more than 50,000 that you could say made it past the 50 million mark. But if you look at the nonprofit world, there's actually very few. And over the study that we did, only about 140 made it past that mark. And so I started to think about, well, there's never enough money for a nonprofit to scale. In fact, there's inherent structural problems that don't support nonprofits in scaling. There's lack of ownership or equity. There's a fundamental disconnect between who's buying your product, the participants in the program, and the funders. There's inherent bias against nonprofit scaling in terms of growth. People want to fund programs, not the growth of an organization. There's so much inherent structural challenges, so that there's this gap between a nonprofit that starts up, gets to a few $1 million, and never actually gets to those that breakthrough scaling component. But then I started to think about, well, actually, scale is probably the wrong question, because scaling up is the right thing to do for capitalism, endless growth. Keep growing your profit until you grab #1 market share in every market around the world. But for nonprofits, it's a fundamentally different objective. It's not for scale. It's actually the wrong question around scaling up. It's actually impacting the problem. And so what we started to do is think much more around, what is the addressable problem? And in fact, many nonprofits might not be the right nonprofit to drive towards scale. And at the end, you might want to get out of the business that you're in if you're actually achieving the goals that you're thinking about. And so a lot of the things that we started to focus on is, how do we really think about a different question, which is, what's the overall problem that we're trying to solve? Who are the stakeholders and points of leverage in the system? And what is the specific role of your nonprofit to get there? And we defined something in an article that we published a few years ago called, what's your end game? Where at the end of the day, how do you really drive this kind of scale in the ecosystem? And I can share a little bit more around the 6 end games that we defined, but essentially there's a lot around replication, having government systems taking over the kind of intervention that you've pioneered, commercial adoption of your intervention, et cetera. And so this has been the work of our organization over the last 5 years or so, really thinking through, how do you scale the impact in the space rather than the organization that you're representing? So excited to share examples and feedback with all of you today.
Perfect, Alice. And thanks for making sure that I'm not the only guy on this panel, sort of as a bit of a skeptic on scale for the sake of scale. Ruchi, over to you.
Yeah, hi, good evening all. Pleasure to be here. So, when Pune City Connect, and, as Louis said, now we are called Lighthouse Communities Foundation. So I may keep toggling between the 2 names, not yet used to Lighthouse Foundation. So when we started off, then the whole objective was to enable large scale social and economic change. And we defined large scale as within the city of Pune. Because we were Pune City Connect, so it has to operate at the scale of the city. And essentially the strategy to achieve that was twofold. The first prong, is that of enabling collective action. So like Mark said that, there's a lot talked about with respect to collective action and collaboration. And there are few examples. We really set out to try and, address that and, try to enable scale through collective action, number one. And the second prong was really to, in our program design, embed behavior change in terms of, Ganesh spoke about this. The fundamental thing that we are trying to change at the individual level is, enabling agency of individuals. So the capacity of a person to determine their own life. So when behavior change happens at scale, then that's actually cultural shift, that's the moving of social norms, and that actually is, social transformation. So those have been the two prongs. And within the collective action bit, we are working with 4 specific stakeholders. The first is Pune Municipal Corporation. In fact, this whole idea was co-created, along with Pune Municipal Corporation, and along with the then municipal commissioner called Kunal Kumar. Again, Ganesh mentioned his name. Apart from that, with the corporate sector, with other nonprofits, and with citizens. So these are the 4 stakeholders. And essentially what Pune Municipal Corporation brings to the table is capital expenditure, locations to run the programs. Corporates provide the operating expenses through corporate social responsibility support and volunteering. Other nonprofits help to scale up specific components of the program that require expertise that they already have. And citizens come in as volunteers. So the whole idea is to leverage the existing expertise in the city so that we can max the specific programs that we are working on. And the second part, which is related to the agency of people, is equally to do with scale, because our theory of change is that if we can impact 20% of the individuals in a population, in terms of irrevocable positive shift in self-image and other behavioral traits, then it's an inflection point for that whole population to change. And therefore in Pune, there are approximately 2 lakh low-income households. They're in slum communities. And hence our objective becomes that minimum 20% of them, that is 40,000 households, are fundamentally impacted through the programs. And that makes it a much more feasible objective than looking at the city's population as a whole. And we've been working on this for the last 5 years. As of now, we work on 3 different tracks and 4 programs within those tracks. So there's sustainable livelihood. One of the programs under that is the Lighthouses, and another is the Global Opportunity Youth Network, which is in fact a very different kind of program. And Alice has been very much a part of supporting that through the Global Opportunity Youth Network. The second is digital empowerment, where the goal is 100% digital literacy in the city. And the third is education. And over the last 5 years, we've reached out to 350 out of the 500 slum communities in Pune. There are 8 lighthouses. There are around 20 digital empowerment centers. We are working with 180 schools, and as of now impacted around 70,000 people directly. So, as far as what Maharishi was saying is concerned, we are still in our Act 1. We have to go to Act 2, and hopefully the best is yet to come.
Thank you, Ruchi. Some of you all have talked about your journeys. Let's go back now into time. Let's go back when you started, and what was the vision at that time? And some of you have alluded to it, so I've got specific questions. Alice, for you, you initially said, you started looking at scale, and then, and then that changed. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about why it changed. What was that aha moment for you? Maharishi, you talked about how you started at Pali and then went forward. So was the aim always that you would scale up across the country, globally, etc., or was it let's do what we can and then take it on from there? And Ruchi, again for you, you called yourselves Pune City Connect, which therefore by definition implied that it was going to be Pune, but now you're going across. Was that something always on the cards, or was that something which changed? So Alice, I'll let you go first. Oh, Alice, again, you're muted. I don't know why. Someone doesn't like you clearly in the admin side. Okay, I think you're on now.
Controversial, Alice.
Alice, maybe request you do not unmute yourself.
Okay.
Just keep it on. That'll be the easier way out. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Professor.
Sorry about that. Wonderful. Thank you. So the things that we've been doing over the last few years is really looking at issues that we think there could be a significant shift in. For example, extreme poverty or financing for smallholder farmers. And so when you take the example of, let's say, the extreme poverty, SDG 1, if you will, where you're looking at more than 750 million people living on less than $1.90 a day, and you look at the interventions that currently exist, they're reaching only a handful of that, several million here and there. And the scale of the challenge is so huge. But if you look at every nonprofit working in the space, again, it's nowhere near the kind of scale that we need to get to. So what we ended up doing is looking at a particular issue area and thinking through what are the interventions that exist, who are the nonprofits that are in the space, and what are the points of leverage in that system. And what we found was a very interesting model. Many of you might have heard of it, called the graduation approach. It was pioneered in Bangladesh with BRAC, where there's a 2-year intervention, 5 very specific subsequent activities. And what we saw through randomized control trials and many evaluations around the world is that it's consistently successful. Incomes go up, assets go up, et cetera. But what we saw is that NGOs and even a group of NGOs could never get to the scale that was needed. And so what we've worked on very closely with these NGOs is to think about how do you actually get to that scale? And we really went in 2 directions. One is working with the World Bank to really think through their social protection and jobs group to transform the way that they're thinking of social protection and the work that they're doing with governments around the world to move from welfare to livelihoods. And then specifically with governments around the world, we've worked with their social protection and welfare teams to, again, at scale, take some of these lessons of the graduation approach and what the NGOs have pioneered and embed that into their social protection systems. So specifically in India, we've actually transformed what's happening in Bihar with the SRLM Jivika team there. We got them huge grants to really, from the World Bank, as well as foundations, as well as global donor collaboratives such as Co-Impact, that have invested tens of millions of dollars to transform how social protection is delivered in the state of Bihar, to really move much more towards a livelihood type of intervention. And we still partnered with NGOs such as Bandhan and others in the space to really drive that scaled impact. Similarly in Jharkhand, they've now rolled up this program all over the entire state with huge success. So it's really transforming the way that you think about these issues from here's what NGOs do on their own to what are the points of real leverage in the system? How do you design for scale and influence those actors to really have that transformative impact? Being very critical and not naive as to the challenges that governments have, of course, and designing for the way that governments at scale can implement rather than the perfect NGO program across the board. So that's been a real learning for us. Again, happy to talk about this in more detail, but that's a really clear example of this kind of approach, all done through multi-stakeholder partnerships. And we've launched maybe more than 40 of these in the last several years across very specific issues, from poverty to youth employment to mental health.
Thank you, Alice. Maharishi, would you like to go through, what was the journey from Pali to where you are today? Did it change? Did the plan change?
So I mean, as a country, we are an elite company. The 4 million girls that I mentioned, that puts us, along with Nigeria and Pakistan, amongst the highest out of school girl population country. So therefore, for us, and why educate girls? Sorry, I must probably touch upon that. Why educate girls? I mean, come on, we have 98% of children who are in school across the country. I mean, there are certain pockets where girls don't go to school. Because, educate girls is perhaps the closest thing to a magic pill, to a silver bullet that any society could perhaps achieve. And it's relatively easier to manage, right? 9 out of 17 SDGs get influenced. Climate scientists rate educating girls higher than solar panels and electric cars, as one of the means to reverse the effect of global warming and climate change. So, there is merit in ensuring that girls end up in school, get educated, etc. Our vision has stayed intact, actually, since the very inception. Our vision is to achieve behavioral, social, and economic transformation for all girls in India, and that's what we are doing. Yes, our ambition has perhaps has changed over time, thanks largely to the way we have grown, thanks largely to the funding that we have, thanks largely to the support that we have received from the government, thanks largely to our board and advisory, which keeps us on our toes. But I think the vision has very much stayed intact. There has been no change. Yes, in between we did digress a bit, derail a bit when we had international aspirations where we thought we'll go to Africa and do and educate girls, redo kind of a model in Africa. But our board basically whipped us and said, hey, listen, the problem in India is far too large. Don't think about going outside India for now. So yeah, but the vision has pretty much stayed intact.
Thanks. And Ruchi, what about you? Pune's cities to many more than Pune cities.
Yeah, the short answer to the question is that the vision has changed because, of course, we were Pune City Connect. We had a vision statement. It was Sampurna Pune, every life enriched. And now we are in the process of actually redefining our vision because, the geographic, the footprint of the organization itself is has shifted. So yes, it would definitely be incorrect to say that no, the vision hasn't changed. But all the same, I would say that it was always clear that this is the stepping stone to something which would enable something larger. What that would be depended on how the program designs worked out, because we are only 5 years old. And at the time that Pune City Connect took on this mandate and started, there were actually very few believers in this model itself, because this model itself is fairly pioneering. My understanding is that there isn't any other such model in India where the nature of collective action that is happening in Pune is taking place. And at that time people didn't believe that the government could actually come in with more resources than the private sector is coming in with in the social development space. So so I think at that point of time the challenge and the main thing was to establish proof points and to ensure that this model is it sustains beyond commissioners and over some significant number of years, and also that the program design, which are all very innovative in nature because they're all around enabling agency, actually deliver tangible impact. So yeah, I think right now we are defining tomorrow we have a meeting with our whole team and we are doing a visioning exercise. So that's where we are right now.
Thank you. So let's move on now to some of the critical skills that you've learned over the last few years about what's needed to scale up, either scale the organization or scale the impact you do. And Ruchi, I sort of will start off with you this time because I think you made some very interesting comments about how the government's actually put in more than the private sector. How do you make this outlive beyond commissioners? And therefore, you've been able to succeed in keeping this a partnership over successive time. So if each of you could tell us a bit about how, or what are the lessons that some of us in the audience can get as to what are the learnings about, or what the critical things you need to be able to scale up.
You want me to start, right?
Yeah, please, yeah, you go ahead first. Yeah.
Okay, so definitely I think one would be about partnership with the government. I inherently believe that for scaling up in India, government has far more resources and therefore there's far more leverage that happens when working in partnership with the government. And my learning during this process has been that the government can be a wonderful partner, and I think that is really the nature of the learning, rather than, it's pretty well known that you partnership with government enable scale, but this kind of partnership. So it's not a partnership which is at an advocacy level. It's not a partnership which is at a service level where PMC has is paying us a fee to do something. It's not a partnership, which is for a specific project and which is time bound. But this is actually sort of a partnership between equals, and it exists at the operational level. It is about actually day-to-day working with Pune Municipal Corporation for mobilization of people, for setting up of spaces, for solving problems that the community people are facing, which may not be in the direct ambit of that particular project. And that, I think, is what makes it very, very unique. So that's number one. The second learning is that it actually does not take that much to make irrevocable positive shift happen. And I have been amazed at the fact that 40 hours, and somehow this 40 hours is common across all our 3 programs. So in the Lighthouse, there is something called the foundation course, which is around enabling agency. It's 40 hours, and it's like magic. A person is different, when entering and when leaving the program, in terms of self-esteem, sense of dignity, self-respect, and moving to a space of possibilities. Our digital empowerment course is 40 hours. And our social emotional learning course per grade over a period of 1 year is actually 40 hours. And I've been amazed that 40 hours is all it takes to actually enable deep change and behavioral shift. So that would be the second. And I think the third is that, it is actually possible to scale. I'm going to borrow from the last line that Ganesh said, it's about love and inclusion. In my head, one of the fantastic learnings has been that it's possible to scale love, because any program for depth and scale to keep happening, it is run by human beings. And I think that the magic ingredient in Lighthouse Foundation programs is the fact that there's personal care and attention. And that is something which was always a question mark, that, okay, you're 2 lighthouses, then you're 3, then you're 4. And does a person have the same sense of culture when they step into a Hadapsar lighthouse versus a Bebewadi one? And they do. And to me, this is because of, this underlying aspect that it's actually possible to scale culture.
Super. Maharishi, would you like to sort of go ahead and talk to us about what were the sort of key sort of ingredients necessary to scale?
Yeah.
Besides, of course, having this fabulous board, which you have.
Of course. By the way, Louis is on our board. And by the way, I was going to mention. So
don't feel the pressure, okay? Don't feel the pressure.
No, you kind of put a gun on my head and said, hey, anyway, so apart from a really incredible board that keeps us on our toes, for us it's been intentionality, because the size of the challenge that we are addressing, 4 million girls across the country itself is large, and therefore scaling up is the only imperative that we have. So intentionality is one. Perhaps in line with intentionality is we don't have ever had any mission drift or mission creep. So, we have stuck to our goalposts that, find each and every girl who's out of school, work with the community, work with the parents, get her in school, keep her in school, ensure that she learns well. Again, in continuation is quality at scale. Oftentimes quality becomes a casualty as we scale up. So for us, that started concerning us very early during our scale up. And therefore we had the development impact bond, which essentially demonstrated that with a scale we could we could provide quality as well if certain processes, if certain systems are put in place. If we take adequate care, then quality at scale is definitely doable. So that's the third ingredient that we have kind of had so far. For us, because education is a state matter, and I must mention here, while the outcomes that we chase as an organization, that's enrollment, retention, learning, are educational in nature, the pathway to achieving those outcomes is rooted in mindset and behavior change. There is a school in every village, and yet communities and parents decide to not send their girls to school. there is a school in every village, and yet somewhere the district administration, the system fails to provide a separate toilet for girls. So it's kind of, mindset change that needs to happen en masse across different stakeholders. So therefore, we cannot do parallel delivery. We shouldn't be running our own schools. So we work very closely with the system, with the government. All states, all districts, we have MOUs in place, and we ensure that we don't compete, but kind of complement the effort and leverage the investment that the system makes in public education. We have had an amazing set of funders. So we have grown over the last dozen odd years with a handful of funders. We have had like-minded, strategic, long-term, unrestricted funders who've basically committed to scaling Educate Girls rather than funding a program in let's say, a Bravani or Bhilwara or Banda or whatever. So we've had an amazing set of funders as well. And we've had an incredible team. So we've been very fortunate. So in fact, a lot of our operational leads right now have kind of grown through the system. So from our Pali district, a lot of our oldest employees are now, leading key portfolios. So just to kind of summarize: intentionality, quality at scale, no parallel delivery, amazing set of funders and brilliant team. And Louis, if I can just take 30 more seconds, sure. All this kind of has been happening in the background, but what has helped us scale up is our strategy. So we our organization basically lives in 5-year cycles. So the first 5-year Act 1, as I mentioned, was all about pilot. Act 2 was all about our strategy 1.0, which took the codified model to scale, and Act 3 is all about mutating the model and trying different delivery approaches, etc. Again, guided by our strategy 2.0.
Thank you, Maharishi. And Alice, it's over to you now to talk about your ingredients in Africa. Are there any lessons that you could learn, say, from? Tell us, actually, it'd be interesting. You've talked about Bihar and Jharkhand, but are there some lessons also from Africa that which you've played around with in Bihar and Jharkhand and other places in India?
Absolutely. And I will say India continues to be a great source of innovation for everyone globally. So always learn a lot from our programs in India. In terms of the key ingredients, I think number one that we often miss is actually what's the addressable market? What is the data around that? In almost all instances, I don't see that kind of information. And so, for example, we're looking at youth employment. How many young people are actually out of work and unemployed? Or if we're looking at smallholder financing, what is the actual size of the problem? So this kind of data is often very much missing in most of the analysis that I've seen. The second is really being rooted in the context that you're operating in. What is the local context? What does it mean? What is the local context that's really going to drive the solutions that are going to be developed and actually the source of sustainability? And a key ingredient there is mapping out the ecosystem. Who are the players? What's already happening? Most of the time, we actually don't need innovation and pilots. There's many wonderful interventions that already exist, but are just subscale and not coordinated. And so if we're looking at who are all the players in that ecosystem during mapping that out, also what are their incentives to participate, not participate, and to really scale up these interventions. So if we're looking at, let's say, smallholder financing, at the end of the day, there is no grant intervention that will ever get to the size of the challenge that's out there. That's the problem. If we're looking at who are the ecosystem players that are not actually providing financing to smallholder farmers, that's actually a problem where there's no commercial banks that are incentivized to be able to participate and do that in a sustainable way. And so, number one, again, data. Number two, mapping out the actual ecosystem and the incentives in that particular space, whether it's youth employment or health or what have you. And number three, how do we bring together those stakeholders in a multi-stakeholder approach where what we recognize is that often an intervention that makes sense today won't necessarily make sense in the future. And so how do you build the right feedback loops, the right incentives in a particular ecosystem so that it sustains in a year, in 3 years, and 5 years? And that has to be locally owned rather than foreign owned or supported by just grant funders. And finally, really developing pathways that are for scale. And so a big thing that we're seeing in Africa right now is how do we shift the incentive structures of, let's say, commercial banks to do a lot more sustainable financing for smallholders and other early stage businesses. And that's going to be a 5 to 10 year pathway, but it's much better than continuing to have grant funded microfinance or interventions that are never going to get to the scale that we want to see. So those are some of the ingredients that we've seen.
You know, it's lovely, Alice, to hear you use the word incentives, because, you know, quite often I get slammed by people in the nonprofit space saying that people do it from the good of their, and I keep saying, no, incentives matter. We'll come back to that and explore that a bit more if we have time. But I want to jump again from what we talked about, Rishi, because there's a question which is coming from Kailash Kant, which is interesting. What is being done for the school children during the lockdown to keep the children engaged? Why don't you tell us something on that?
Okay, so you know, each state government, the 3 states that we work in, has their own digital delivery mechanism. Each has their own app, and each has their own curriculum designed for digital delivery, etc. However, the real challenge is that we operate in villages where there is extreme poverty and extreme marginalization. That's one. Second, there isn't great connectivity, internet connectivity. And third most important thing, there's no access to devices, smart devices or laptops or tablets, whatever, for these children. So we realized it very early on that all the digital interventions are not going to necessarily reach these kids. And it's going to get compounded for these kids, you know, a drop in learning for 1 year because they are first generation school goers. They are not, their parents are not, have never been to school or have dropped out very early on. So what we are doing is, with due permissions from the state government, while maintaining adequate social distancing, masks, sanitizers, etc., we are running community-based learning center. So under normal circumstances, we would run our learning curriculum in the classroom, because as a part of the MOU, we get to spend 40 weeks in the classroom, 3 days a week in the classroom. 16 weeks and 3 days a week. So that's 48 sessions in the classroom under normal circumstances. But right now we are running something called as Camp Vidya, as we have called it, at Chopals, at community centers, at the Sarpanch's home, etc., while maintaining adequate distance, hygiene, etc. So currently we are covering about 7,500 villages and a little over 125,000 children daily as we speak. Learning is happening. We intend to take Camp Vidya to many more villages, but currently our capacities permit us to take it to about 7,500 villages.
Thank you. And Ruchi, maybe you could answer this question. I'm not sure where Karun Sharma is coming from, but maybe it's, talking about using the heart as well as the head, because we've talked about, process, etc. So the question which Karun has is, are some guidelines for CSR audit being framed in India and globally to ensure that CSR makes its customers smile? It's made us smile on the panel, but
makes its customers as in the community people?
I guess so. How do you sort of make them smile as opposed to just, okay, I've got a project to deliver. It's how do you bring happiness as well as reducing poverty? I guess that's what Karun's coming at.
Well, I mean, in terms of the systemic aspect, as we know that, with the CSR laws coming into play and the 2% law, CSR has become a topic in the boardroom, and also therefore the strategy for CSR is something that has inputs of across all senior levels of the organization. So I think that itself has helped a lot, because it is led from the top, and therefore in terms of making it meaningful, making sure that there are measurable impact parameters, and therefore that the impact is actually happening. So that would be really the systemic aspect. I don't know if that answers Karun's question, or if there's some other aspect. If so, then please let me know.
Okay. Professor, I have a question for you, Professor Mani. Is this session being recorded, and is the copy going to be available later? Professor Mani? Because I think there's some very interesting points that have come up over here.
Yes, it will, Louis, to answer your question. Yeah,
okay, thank
it's
you.
being recorded, and we're going to send it to not only.
Thank you, because I think there's, because hearing all of you talk is interesting, because in some of the organizations I'm involved with, there is this discussion, how do we scale up, etc. So I think this will be very useful for a lot of other organizations to hear this conversation, because we've really got three great people over here. Okay, now let's look at some of the screw ups. Let's look at, lessons that we've learned from the mistakes we've made. Who wants to go first?
I don't mind going first.
Okay.
Far too many to count, actually. and yes, I mean, most of them have been more evolutionary rather than suicidal. But I mean, one of the biggest mistakes includes hiring the wrong talent. I mean, we have done this in the past. There is this allure of private sector transitioning to the development sector, and yes, I'm one of them. But we tend to jump at solid resumes and tend to hire them. And we once made a mistake of hiring our operations lead, who was a phenomenal FMCG insurance combination guy, and well, it was quite a pain. It was quite a nightmare to deal. So hiring mistakes, all in all, and what we have learned from that is that we need to grow our own timber. And in fact, the board has mandated that we every quarter report to them how many internal movements have we made. So whenever we scale up, how many positions are filled in from internal resources. The board has been very hawkish on about getting external talent, etc. And they're very keen that we promote, offer cross-functional teams to work together, people to have secondment across different functions, etc. So all that it came from our hiring mistakes that we made. The other was a partnership mistake. I mean, there were a few, but one was very glaring. I mean, huge money. I mean, I wouldn't want to name that funder, but a large bank got on board, huge funding, which was then our largest funder, and then they started pushing, programs. Then they started pushing elements that weren't a core to our programs. Once Swachh Bharat got launched, they said, now you're going to build toilets in schools. And we said, no, I mean, that's not our program model. We make the system, the government, utilize its RTE compliant funding to build toilets, but we are not going to do it. So, then we had to opt out of that partnership. So, I mean, the allure of money perhaps got us to, get in bed with a partner who was, wasn't necessarily right. The third was, as we were scaling up, and we were scaling up very fast, and we realized that we were overheating as an organization. But there is a target, there's the strategy, there are funders, and there are compulsions around that. And we, for 1 year, we didn't realize, but our turnover just shot through the roof. 1 year, 2017 in particular, we had a 40% turnover. Now, people became the biggest casualty as we were overheating as an organization. And then we, took our problem to the board. The board recommended a few measures. We too became a lot cautious with how we were growing and obviously looking after our people. And now, as of March 31st, 2020, we are down to about 18-19% organization-wide. So yeah, I mean, a lot of lessons that we have learned along the way as we have scaled up very, very quickly.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
I can go next.
Sure.
Okay, so I think one would be, definitely inadequate investment in systems for financial management and also people. We've been very, very diffident about our expenditure because we actually grew from, we've not had, until Aspen Institute came in last year, for the first 4 years, we had 0 institutional donors. So it was all CSR funding, and we had to raise money, then we would spend, and there would be some proof point, then one can raise more money, then you spend. And so it was a really arduous and slow way of growing because there was no infusion of funds whatsoever. So obviously we ended up really under investing in systems and we suffered. I mean, I think now we are in a much better position, but there was a time when for the entire year, every 2 months, there was like a crisis, which literally took entire top management's time for, say 2 weeks at a time. Like you just have to sort it out because otherwise maybe you lose a donor or you're going to come across as not having had integrity. So you really have to set it right and figure it out. So it was extremely stressful. So I think that's definitely number one. I mean, one of the learnings, and I think the overheating thing is very, very the same here. I think it must be the same for many nonprofits. But I mean, I've really learned that when one has the right people in the right places, then things become so much easier. And I think we still have some way to go to make that happen because we are still not really in anywhere near comfortable as far as, I mean, in fact, this year has been obviously very, very disastrous as far as funding is concerned. So not able to even set it right. And I think the third thing is really with respect to being able to sense and shift the pattern as required. So for example, when we, even in what I'm saying, like when we started out, then we had to be so careful about every rupee. Then there came a time around 3 years after that, say around 1.5 years back, when actually we had some funds which we could have used for investing in the system, but we were so used to not spending any money that we were just constantly underspent. And in fact, that year we ended up just underutilizing because we were not in that mode of actually leveraging resources and thinking big and thinking, okay, this is what is needed. Always the thinking has been, how do we make the spend less, money? And another kind of pattern has been around, shifting to a cognitive mode. Like I think in the social sector, this is very common that you have to, it's very complex. You have to be in touch with communities, social, economic, political, what is happening at the ground level and all of that. And it requires a certain mindset. And that mindset is not necessarily data driven and rational and cognitive. And so I think we literally have like a few people in the organization who are cognitive, most people in the organization who are good at the community work aspect, and how to shift, from one pattern to the next when the time is right. And Alice has really also, been, because as part of the Aspen Institute, GDI, the Global Opportunity Youth Network, she's been working with us. And I have learned a lot in terms of what a macro data approach is all about, and I hope that over time, not just due to GeoVine, but even now we have launched our own ERP platform and all of that, I hope we are able to become much more cognitive and straddle that cognition versus community orientation in a more balanced way.
Thank you. Alice?
Sure, maybe 4 things from my side. One has been very much what we heard from Educate Girls around wrong partners, if you will. And even sometimes it could be the right partner, but we didn't do the right analysis of where the source of power was. So one of the things that I find that Ruchi does very well with, and Ganesh with Pune Municipal Corporation, is who are the decision makers? What are the dynamics within government? How do you continue to keep that partnership effective? When we were speaking with Jivika, for example, what are the politics within that institution? How does it work? What happens when there's an election cycle shift? So we've made a lot of mistakes where we didn't really do the right analysis around the partners that are critical for scale. The second, and I'll never forget this, is around reduced quality. And again, we heard that from Educate Girls, where if an NGO is delivering a program directly, and it's a good NGO, they can get a quality of, let's say, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. But once you start working with partners through government, through public education institutions like we just heard, what happens to quality? If we say, okay, now we're going to reach 10 million people, but it's a 3 out of 10, is it now acceptable? At what point do we decide that this is a scale versus quality trade-off? Because there will be some quality decline. And so an 8 out of 10 is okay, a 7 out of 10. And so how do you really build for the right evaluation structures, the right MIS systems? This comes back to some of the M&E and the platform discussions, the incentives, the checks and balances, to really make sure that quality is really an incentive around the whole organization. And then there's been a lot around lessons personally with being a bit donor driven, where we say we want to make this shift, but then a donor comes along and says, hey, can you just do this little thing for a year? We'll give you this much money. It'll keep the lights on. It's hard not to take that money, I have to say. And then the last thing I would say is also personal around my own lack of patience. Behavior change that Ruchi's been talking about. It takes years. Systems change. It takes years, maybe decades. And so how do you have the quick wins and the momentum that you keep going, but at the same time recognize that we're talking about at scale, really shifting big systems, big institutions. And so how do you demonstrate progress, but yet really keep your patience and your motivation up? And I've failed on that one too.
Thanks, Alice. Okay, listen, we've got time just to wrap up. I go back to Karun. Karun, you raised the question about the intent of corporates focusing on getting their money back in some way. There are good corporates, there are bad corporates, there are corporates with different agendas, and I think it's important, therefore, as everyone's talked in the last sort of 5 minutes about picking the right partner and making sure that you know their agenda, what's driving them, to be able to avoid unfortunate conflicts of interest or things which upset you. So I guess I'd like to each of you to sort of, as your last comments, what would you like to leave our audience with? Lessons on scaling. Spend a minute or so, each of you, and then we'll call it an end. So Alice, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I think as we've talked about through this panel is data is power, really thinking through being data driven, both in what your addressable market is, who the ecosystem players are, what your progress is it going well? How do you evaluate it? That's key. Second, really understanding that there's an ecosystem of actors. No one organization can do it alone. Where are the points of leverage in that system? And third, being in some ways humble and patient around what is your particular role, whether you're a donor, a social enterprise, a nonprofit, being very clear on your own role as part of that whole ecosystem. And it's okay to have a smaller impact for you individually as a person or an organization, as long as you recognize what your role is in that broader ecosystem. So those are my 3 takeaways from today.
Thanks, Alice. Maharishi?
So from our experience, a strategy-backed scale-up plan. So, as I said, pilot to strategy 1.0 to strategy 2.0. I mean, if we wouldn't have had our strategic roadmap, perhaps we wouldn't have scaled as much as we have. So strategy, always have an org strategy and a 5-year roadmap in place. That's one. Second, yes, you will be forced to hire externally from external sources, but once you reach a certain semblance of scale, try, as our board mandates, growing our own timber, because that kind of helps. You get the right values aligned people, you get the right mission driven talent, and it's a lot easier to have internal people who have grown through the system manage or lead different functions. And the third is, do not let the tail wag the dog. I mean, do not let funding dictate where you go. Do not let funding dictate a mission drift, a mission creep, etc., etc. Stick to your core. In our case, it's girls who are out of school, and we wouldn't compromise for anything.
Super. Ruchi, you have the last word.
It's only one. It is around collaboration. That collaboration is, we all know it is absolutely essential for scale, but it is so possible. And I feel that the way to, here we've, at Pune City Connect, now Lighthouse Foundation, we've worked over the last 5 years with more than 50 donors, 40 implementation partners, many of them other nonprofits, and of course, very, very actively with Pune Municipal Corporation. And I think that the reason it has worked is because each one has come in with their expertise, and they have not had to bother about coordinating and figuring out about how this collaborative will work. That is something which, Pune City Connect has taken on. And, sort of being like that central spine that is helping everyone to come together. And each one is comfortable in their own space, but at the same time contributing. And of course, there's a higher level of collaboration that's possible, which is at the level of co-creation. And we hope to reach there. But even before reaching there, it's entirely possible to make this happen. And that itself also really lends to scale. So that's what I would like to leave everyone with.
Well, a big thank you to Alice, Maharishi, and Ruchi. I must say, as Ganesh, got to thank you for getting these three panelists together, because I had a lot of questions which I wanted to get addressed on scale up. And since I was the sort of, I coordinating this, I could ask all the questions that I wanted to know and get the answers I want, which is why I said, I hope there's a recording of this, because I think it'll be a very useful lesson for so many organizations who are battling the same question about scaling up. How do you scale up? Do you scale up internally? Do you scale up through partnerships? Is it scale of impact versus scale of yourself? Thank you, all three of you, Alice, Ruchi, and Maharishi. And I guess I don't know who I pass it on to. Uma, is it you or Ganesh? I'm not sure.
No, me.
Thanks a lot. Okay.
Thank you, Louis. And I hope you took all the hints that Maharishi was giving you about
the board.
How bad his board is. So you better
You're also there. You're a partner in crime, by the way.
I know, but it's been absolutely stunning, because I think, Alice, thank you so much, because I think you brought such a fresh perspective into what we do. And of course, Ruchi and Maharishi, keep doing the great work you always do. So it was just fantastic.
Thank you.
I think towards the end, we heard this mention of good corporates and bad corporates from my friend Louis. So I think we should try and get 3 good corporates to tell us what they're really doing to support the whole social ecosystem. And as I mentioned earlier, Aloka and Shanta, you were there, but Aloka, I think it's important for us to realize that, look, there is so much to be done in this country, and so many good NGOs and a few not so good NGOs, but nevertheless, we really like to understand from you, what is the process of choosing, how do you support, how do you enable scale, etc., etc. So I'm seriously looking forward to this panel, and thank you all so much for accepting our invitation to join. So my job is just to introduce Uma, and Uma, of course, is a MBA from FMS Delhi and has probably 3 significant stages of her career. The first was in banking and manufacturing. And then I think her odyssey into, if I may call, education and skills started, because she was running career education for NIIT, worked with me to actually build AppTech for a little bit, and then did a very pioneering initiative in Z Telefilms, where she actually set up Z Education, what is now called Z Learn. And I've seen that the speed at which they could get everybody from Prime Minister Narasimha Rao to Sushma Swaraj to really endorse a complete television initiative on skills. And interestingly, without meaning to do so, even trained a few Pakistanis in the process, because you can't stop a television footprint from going across the borders. So it's actually amazing to see those kind of models. And after that, of course, I think she built a e-learning company and sold it. And they were doing work for even the US Army. So it's quite interesting to see how much of influence Indian skills capability has on across the world. So I think it's very interesting. And I think over the last 10 years has built a very, very successful company called Global Talent Track, which probably is one of the most significant skills providers to small towns, medium scale, working with corporate social responsibility funds to really make over 1 million young people get livelihoods and jobs over the last 10 years. So I think that's been amazing. And now, of course, Uma is, I think, working on digital platforms for skills, new areas like artificial intelligence and analytics, and of course, running the Education Foundation, which is looking at new things. I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about that as she goes forward. So I think it's been a stellar 38. Thank you, Uma, for agreeing to chair this panel. I must confess that the only mistake Uma made in the last 30 years was to get married to me, but I got everything right. Over to you, Uma.
Hope that saga continues into this session and beyond. So thank you for that introduction. It has been fascinating to actually sit through these sessions right from the beginning of this conference. Professor Mani, congratulations for putting together such a fantastic team and phenomenal set of speakers. Each one of them have left behind or given us several interesting nuggets to think about. So the session that we are going to now unveil would also continue with this similar kind of an approach, which is basically to look at how do we build an ecosystem for scaling CSR initiatives. We heard mostly the ideas and experiences and perspectives of people who have been on the those who have been with the large corporates, and then they have moved over to setting up NGOs, or who are on the boards of large NGOs who are trying to, not-for-profits, who are trying to scale. But I'm privileged to have on this panel 3 stalwarts who are leading CSR initiatives for their own organizations. And let me begin by introducing them first, and then I will move on to setting the context for our discussion. The first panelist I'm privileged to introduce to all of you is Shanta Valluri. Shanta Valluri Gandhi, she's a dear friend, head of human resources, CSR and internal branding at RBL Bank. She has over 30 years of experience in the financial services sector. She's an MBA from Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies, and she also has an MA in economics from University of Mumbai. Shanta is part of the core transformational team that has been set up at RBL Bank. What is really interesting about Shanta is the ease with which she has been able to address people issues, whether it is within her own bank or, for that matter, people at large through the CSR initiative, several of which have been truly innovative and path-breaking. We have been privileged to work closely with Shanta and understand her energy and the rhythm with which she approaches the problems and comes up with innovative solutions. And I hope that during the course of our discussion, we will experience some of that from Shanta. The second speaker we have, the second panelist we have, is Aloka, who is again another fascinating individual who has moved from journalism, political science, and in fact, she studied political science from University of Calcutta. She started off as a financial journalist, and she worked with Financial Express and Business India, and then moved into the corporate sector. And she has been at the helm of affairs for CSR, what is known as corporate sustainability for HSBC India, for several years now. She has also been working very closely with FICCI, with CII. She has been a steering committee member of the India Sanitation Coalition, and she is a trustee of Earthwatch Institute India. Aloka has funded, on behalf of HSBC, several path-breaking initiatives, and she is always on her toes to look for innovative opportunities, particularly in the fields of skills development, financial inclusion, environment and climate change. And many of them are significantly scaled initiatives, so there'll be several insights we look forward to hear from her. The third panelist we have with us today is Sudhakar. He is heading the CSR initiative for Dabur. After completing his bachelor's degree in law from Delhi University, he went on to doing a master's degree in social work from Delhi School of Social Work. He has worked previously with Ranbaxy and Ernst & Young, and he has dabbled with a whole range of functions, including HR, change management, merger and acquisitions, and he has brought to bear onto CSR initiatives a lot of that experience. And currently, besides leading the CSR initiative for Dabur Group, he is also involved with CII, FICCI, NHRDN, and the Affirmative Action Committee of CII. So that's a very impressive panel we have today, who are going to talk about how have they been looking at building a support ecosystem for scaling some of the social initiatives that we have been involved with. Actually, before we get into this interactive session, I just want to set a context for what are the key areas we would like to dive into in some amount of detail. Companies actually start focusing on their own priority areas. Sometimes it is more on account of an interest area identified, or many a time it is some not-for-profit who comes forward and presents some opportunity, and it seems interesting. So what starts off as a small pilot slowly grows, and while the organization sets aside some funds to grow that initiative over a period of time, sometimes in certain areas, organizations do realize that this is a gigantic problem. And it's a problem that just not their own company can address. It may require synergistic support to scale the initiative, not only in terms of monetary investment, but there may be other requirements for the project. Maybe specific experience, maybe familiarity with a certain location, maybe a familiarity with a certain type of population we want to address, or access to specific know-how or tools. And what happens to the project beyond a certain point of time when the organization decides to stop funding because they have other priorities, but the project requires to be supported even for a longer period of time. So there may be many reasons because of which many organizations, and I'm aware that HSBC and RBL Bank, some of the organizations I know that they start thinking about such questions right at the start before even getting involved in or supporting that specific initiative. And therefore, they require to work with government, with NGOs, other service providers, other companies who are like-minded. And Shanta is known to work on this whole theme of how do we build collaboration around people and organizations who can bring together their respective capabilities so that we can make 1 + 1, not 2, but 11. So let me give you some example from what we have done through our own foundation at Umret, which is about 2 hours drive from Ahmedabad in Gujarat. Now, this center that has been set up there is primarily focused on community transformation through employability-led initiatives. For this, NES, the foundation, partnered with Devang Mehta Foundation, Umret Nagar Palika, which has provided one of its unused schools for the employability center. And while we have been running this center for a while, what we realized was it was so very critical to address this question of employability from the perspective of knowing what exactly are the aspirations and the expectations of the local population is. And therefore, building those partnerships with employers, with other stakeholders in the towns, in the nearby villages, in this sort of a rural setup, people wouldn't even travel 5 kilometers for a job. Therefore, what we think is training done and giving them a job may not really make sense for them. So on account of all of these, the intimate understanding, intimate relationship that had to be built with all of those residing in the nearby villages, they came in extremely handy, especially during COVID time, when not a single day of was lost on account of inability of people to come to the training center. So this sort of online community, online training, and the ability to go across to communities and find local opportunities for training, all of these were feasible. And what also was very, very fascinating is when jobs are not so easy to find, and there is an opportunity, there is a need for livelihood. There is a famous temple called Dakor Temple, not very far from the center. And now this temple, the people involved with the temple came forward and they said, okay, how can we help the community? How can we help the center actually continue to flourish? And so this is the kind of collaboration and partnership we have seen really take off in a rural location where collaboration was really the key. So having set that context, I mean, there are many challenges, there are many opportunities, and there are many ways to tackle all of the issues one may face from time to time. I would like to now jump into understanding from each one of you, beginning with Shanta, for your own CSR priorities. How have you been going about nurturing the ecosystem? Who are the key stakeholders you have considered are critical for supporting the ecosystem? And if you can cite a success story, that will be really fantastic. Over to you, Shanta.
Thank you so much, Uma, and nice to see Aloka once again on the panel. And this is a great opportunity, and thank you, BMA, for giving this opportunity. Most importantly, when I look at my organization, okay, our mission statement has got 4 legs to it. One is employees, one is customer, one is community, and definitely shareholder focus. Any priority that I want to set up, there are 3 things that these 4 elements will have to be covered, which is a combination of employee, customer, community, and shareholder. And importantly, we focus on what we call the triple bottom line, which is planet, profit, and people. So when we look at any priority and which is going to be long-term and sustainable, we would look at all these metrics before we decide whether we want to embark on this. And there's one particular success story, and there are many actually, Uma. It's very unfair when we are asked one. But let me take the one that we think is, something that I can speak about, is what we do is setting up schools for girl child education. And I think that's a very important lead-in for us. So we set up our first RBL, Udbhav RBL school last year in 2019, primarily to educate girls. So there is a process, okay? Like I told you, we manage 4 different stakeholders. So first was I wanted to get my employees engaged because they are a very important part because they identify with the purpose of the organization. What did we do? We have got something called a flagship program called the Cyclathon, where our employees cycle for 1,000 kilometers. We give them a 10-day on duty and completely supported by their businesses, and their job is to cycle and raise funds for girl child education. So that's how we engage our employees. How do we engage our customers? We raise funds from our customers by becoming aggregators. And we actually start raising funds over and above our CSR funds, because CSR funds are used for operating expenses of these schools, whereas the capital expenditure for these schools, whether when we want to take over a school from an existing trust, remodel the school, make sure that the school has got the capability to look like what we would like to call as the brand of the school, is where we raise funds from our customers, our partners, so we become fundraisers through these multiple channels. Community, we are creating these Udbhav RBL schools. We have a mandate which we took to the board, where we will set up 10 schools by 2030. These schools are along with IIM Ahmedabad chapter of Hyderabad, and that's our ultimate motive, to ensure that these kids don't just finish 10th standard, but they actually move on to finishing. We are running something called the Mission 250. In the Mission 250, we will identify 250 children across these 10 schools who will then go on to study in various large institutes, which we could not have afforded as underprivileged children. So we have a tie-up with Ashoka University after they finish their 12th standard to complete their full education and become sustainable. We also want to drive IIT, IIM profiles from these kids. So we are going to handhold them to graduation and beyond. We've also tied up with FFE for medical, for enrolling them to medical and other engineering colleges. Our whole objective is to make them sustainable. And all these tie-ups are already in place. And we're very proud to tell you that we had 100% first class and above results from our first Udbhav RBL school, which is largely focused on girls and based out of Hyderabad. When it comes to shareholder focus, let me be very clear that we have found that productivity of our employees and contribution from our employees definitely goes up whenever we have looked at people participating in issues which are community linked, because their identification with the purpose, and we have directly seen a correlation between our cyclathon and productivity at work. So there is this whole thing about building our mission into reality. What are we doing with all of this is we will create our triple bottom line focus, which is in COVID was a great awakening for us, where we looked at the planet, and I think all of us are working towards that. And of course, notwithstanding the fact that there is profitability the moment productivity goes up. And of course, our people are engaged, which is an extension of extension of the larger ecosystem. So there is a lot of players in this game, and it's not just about a corporate writing out a check. It's about a corporate realizing what impact it can make across various stakeholders at any point of time for ensuring sustainability. Because ultimately, let me tell you, Uma, I may be very passionate about CSR, and I cannot be, as long as I'm in the organization, I don't want my organization to drive CSR. I have to leave a legacy behind. And if I have to leave a legacy behind, my predecessor may have worked differently. I probably created something which my successor tomorrow just needs to take it. So I'm very clear till 2030. This is a legacy we will leave behind. It doesn't matter whether Shanta is insignificant over the long-term journey of RBL Bank's plans. So I think that's what we are aiming at from a long-term sustainability. It's not individual, it's a community, it's multiple stakeholders put together.
Fantastic. So Shanta, so that was a great story, great example that you have given, talking about how you want to build legacy for the organization and making a lasting impact on the community. I'll come back to you and we will talk about impact measures. You've already mentioned about some of those, which including education. It's not just supporting them for education in the school, but going beyond. So that could be one of the interesting ways to look at outcomes and impact. We'll come back to you in a bit, but now I'd like to move on to Aloka. Aloka, over to you for, we would like to hear from you. Out of the several initiatives that you have supported, which one stands out for you, particularly in the context of ecosystem support for scaling? Over to you, Aloka. Hello? Hello? You need to unmute yourself, Aloka.
Will have to, yeah. I think the host had to unmute. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So thank you. Thank you so much, Uma, for having me in this discussion. And I was also, I heard some of the panelists from the last session as well, and some very, very important points. Great to meet Shanta and the other panelists as well. So I think we are in a very we are in an interesting time as we speak. I mean, first we thought post-pandemic, and now you have so many other changes in the law, etc., which is also going to have a significant impact on the sector at large. So Uma, what I'll do is, Shanta has elaborated on the employee engagement piece, which is a very significant piece of this entire ecosystem. So I'll cover something else. So for us at HSBC, the way we look at it, for us, we always think that when you're talking about CSR grants, any amount of grant is actually limited. And the way we look at it is to use grants effectively to create solutions in the areas that we work. That's an approach that we have. And with that we've been working under two large verticals. One, of course, is skilling, and the other is environmental sustainability. Both are pretty large and complex areas. So if you're talking about investing in the ecosystem, it actually requires significant amount of investments in this. But let me talk about the approach we've taken when it comes to skilling, because to some extent, I think we've made some progress in this space over the past decade, I would say, and we've been working in this space since 2012. And what we have seen in this space is that, how do you achieve scale? There's a lot of, so two things. One is, when you're talking about ecosystem, it actually entails a huge number of issues that one will need to address. So when we looked at the ecosystem at large, we looked at that we had to kind of narrow it down to see that, what are the things that we're going to focus on. So when it came to employment or income generation or inclusion, we basically created one program under which we had three big pillars. So the first, of course, is employability linked skilling, because we thought that, we are going to have the highest number of youth in India in the next few years. And therefore, that's one big requirement for the sector. The second is, of course, self-employment or entrepreneurship, which of course has to drive. And I think the pandemic has made this particular pillar even more significant in the coming days, because jobs are going to be impacted quite severely. And the third is, in some areas, there is a huge requirement for upskilling or creating of trainers. So that's the approach that we had. So when we look at skilling from HSBC's perspective, we are looking at these three pillars to reach out to this entire ecosystem. Now, who are the stakeholders? The stakeholders are again many. First, of course, being a grant-led program, the civil society plays the the biggest role in terms of delivery of the program at the grassroots level. How do you achieve scale? Actually, we have really spoke about this issue so much at length, but what we realize that in India, for any one organization to scale, it is quite difficult. So maybe one can work on a common agenda, but with multiple organizations, and that's how we have designed our interventions to work with the. So currently, we are working with about 94 NGOs across the country. Giving skill development, very focused. So the fact is, with the 94 organizations, we have very clear, we are not focusing on everything. We are focusing on 10 services sectors. And what we have told them that you may continue with your work at the grassroots level, but for this program, you have to ensure that those you train, 70% of those have to be placed. And that's something I think over the past, some 7 years or 6 years, it's taken us quite a lot of time to actually change the conversation at the nonprofit sector from just training for employment. And I think there was a huge, what do you call it, constraint at the nonprofit center to speak with the employers. And what we basically push for is speak with the employer to understand what they require. And that's important, therefore, to skill and place, because you will never be able to place if you're not skilling in the right manner. So that's something that we have really pushed. And I have to tell you one thing that has been a huge success, and I've been a huge transition, I would say, with the partners that we have worked with. They've actually seen a big impact in that. So that's one thing that we have worked on. On the self-employment part, as a strategy, we worked with NGO arms of microfinance institutions because they have a skin in the game. They create clients for themselves. And that as a strategy has worked really well for us. And we have a very, very large program across the country. So that's what the thinking is about. And of course, being a financial institution, it's about skilling, it's about financial education. And as we speak with you, we are also talking about digital education in a big way. So I'll just give you one example because you mentioned ecosystem. In our work in financial inclusion, we worked with two of the largest networks of microfinance institutions and small banks and NBFCs, which is Southern and MFIN. And many years back, we started work on a digital literacy program with an outcome which said that 40% of the disbursement of these MFIs, these are for-profit MFIs, 40% will be on the digital platform. That was the outcome that we were looking for. Now, today, as you know, that if you see the MFIs, most of the disbursements are today in digital. And currently, we are working with this, again, with Southern and MFIN, we are going to start a program in terms of how we make now collection through the digital platform. So what we feel is that using grants, again, I'm repeating, to create solutions for the grassroots is a way of multiplying or scaling the impact of the program. And the last point I'll focus is that of, when you say ecosystem, if you're training, you have to create traders. So that's another thing that we focus on. So we're looking at it in a holistic manner. And the other thing that we're looking at is just not HSBC and the civil society. We've got screening partners, we've got very strong M&E, and academia all coming together to work at this, because it's for one organization in partnership with many also won't work, because we all have our skills, and it's important to get all the skill sets together for the development of a particular area. So I'll stop here, Uma, and take any questions.
Thank you, Aloka. You touched upon several stakeholders with whom you work with, and what are the unique approaches you have taken, and particularly what are the unique models of partnership that you have created. If we have time, we will come back again to you to talk a little bit more about how do you do the impact analysis, especially when you work with 96 NGOs. There will be a lot of learnings, and at the same time, how do you measure? So we will come back to you on that one. So over to you, Sudhakar. we would like to hear from you, from your years of experience with Dabur.
Yeah, thanks, Uma. Just briefly to tell you about Dabur, CSR came into as a law only in 2014. However, the company has particular statement, which comes as a vision from the founder. What is that life which cannot bring comfort to others? That's the driving thing which has been there. So much before CSR law came into force, maybe sometime in 1994, they felt that it's important to engage a society's name called Sustainable Development Society, and that's the time they started the work in the state of Uttar Pradesh, because they were primarily located in Uttar Pradesh. So when the law came in 2014, frankly, it didn't surprise us what is corporate responsibility and what is social development, what is community development. That's one thing. The only thing what 2014 changed is more funds to us to engage into various activities. That's one thing. Now, coming to key stakeholders, Suma, we having been working, and primarily my education is also social work. So I used to work in communities as part of my master's program. So when I joined Dabur about 19 years ago, for me, community development was not new. So it continued as my own assignment along with my HR responsibility. But in 2014, it became full-fledged responsibility. Now, in terms of stakeholders, whether it is a company, community, or NGOs we work with, we firmly believe the key stakeholder one is the community, because in many states which we work, the important thing is what does the community need. Many times we tend to plan that, look here, I am sitting in the corporate office, I would say, let me think, this is good for this community. That is not the approach we took. We took the approach is that community is our key stakeholder. We need to analyze what does the community need. That's one thing which we always felt. Because of that, whatever program we started in any of the communities completely became successful. Just to give you an example, we always do a need analysis in a community. We went to Tejpur in Assam. We commenced our programs, and in the program, we thought typically they would like in the skills. Beautician program is one program which is very popular in the Northeast. But when we went into the communities, started doing the surveys, understanding what is the need, the thing what came up was a surprise. English speaking is one thing which they wanted as a primary thing. So the beautician program came as a third. Naturally, we need to reorient our own working towards completely looking at the skills, what they require, the communities need. So that's why in every program of CSR, we personally feel that communities are the key stakeholders for any CSR intervention. To give you one more example, in Uttar Pradesh, about 10, 11 years ago, we thought toilets are a big problem in the communities. Why not we construct toilets? Frankly, they came back to us, look here, that is not our priority today. Please allow us to skill the women of the household, skill the girls for various activities which they can learn. So that's the change which we said, because the community being the stakeholder, they told us what they need. So many times what happens, we in the corporate, we think, we try to think that we are the best people to judge what community needs. Frankly, that is not the approach we as Dabur take. It is the community's requirement, what needs to be done. That's one thing which has been successful. And instead of constructing toilets in 1994, we went into skilling. We went into the skills like cutting and tailoring, went into beautician training, went into computer education. So then automatically, lot of these things, just to give you an example, the people who are trained in our skilling centers, they have become trainers. So that is how the entire need of the community has been understood, and then those programs have been focused. And when in 2016, when issue relating to Swachh Bharat came, then they again approached us, look here, now the government is running this program, why don't you help us to construct household toilets? So that's how, for us, the key stakeholders in the entire corporate social responsibility program is the community. Rest all come secondary. NGO partners or the company, all those things are secondary issues as far as the key stakeholders. That's one belief which we strongly believe.
Okay. Thank you, Sudhakar. I have a second question for you in this round. I'd like to go with you first. You mentioned about meeting the different requirements, the different priorities of the community from time to time.
Yeah.
And that is really how you have defined as the key stakeholders. So my question is, in a given community, there might be different competing priorities. How do you decide what priority you should be addressing in a given year? And at the same time, there is a question from Renu Kurana here. You also have overall organization objectives.
Right.
So do you also keep in mind the overall organization objectives, the community's priorities? How do you actually bring these together and balance it out to decide where to focus your investments on?
Thanks, Ma'am. Now, let me tell you, from the macro level, we as a company have kept a CSR policy within the overall guidelines of the government. We have kept health, education, skilling, and sustainability. These are the 4 key areas. That is one priority. Second thing is that what are the geographical areas we need to cover? Because India is such a big country, we have 600,000 villages. How can we spread it too thin? So first is the overall in terms of activities. Second, the area. That is now coming to the community priorities. So we need to see that what this is the broad guidelines of the company, but we sit with the communities. For example, practically more than 100 villages, every pradhan is known to our CSR teams. That is the point of contact. That's one. And we have a lot of community level meeting. I myself have visited at least 20-25 villages to understand what are the needs of the community, what else we can do, how do they want to participate. With the result, the priorities are set by the communities and not by the company. But the only thing what we tell them, look here, we don't want to enter areas which are outside the broad parameters of health, skilling, education, and sustainability. That is one thing which we are, because the board also has certain limitation. Look here, you don't have sort of a indefinite funding which we can do. There is some requirement. So that is how broader parameter, but programs detailing work is as per the community requirement. We just don't spread it too thin. So if I go to a village, I try to see that, if I have my 4 activities, how can I see that, leverage these activities for a particular village? So with the result, the village community managed by the Pradhan and the key stakeholders in the village, we sit with them, understand, look here, what are the priorities for this year? What are the priorities for the next year? That is how we try to align the community requirement for overall our annual plans.
Okay. Thank you, Sudhakar. Thank you very much. Over to Aloka. You mentioned about working with 96 skilling partners, and you also mentioned that one of the measures of success will be employability. So 70%, which is the NSDC norm, is something that you have also adopted. Yet there may be challenges because there will be differences in the way each of the skilling partners would be working. Therefore, how do you eventually figure out whether this investment in a given year has been successful? If you can please share the differences in the way they do the impact assessment, or will there be commonalities?
Unmute her.
Professor Mani, can you please unmute?
Yeah. Thank you. So Uma, it's been quite a challenging thing, and it's been a pretty learning curve for us, I'll tell you, because when we started work with very large number of NGOs, but it's been an interesting journey too. What we have seen is that to create a common platform when it comes to impact assessment or monitoring and evaluation actually has worked well for us, particularly when we talk about. So we have, like I said, I gave 2 buckets. One is for skilling and the other is for environmental sustainability. And within skilling, again, we have the verticals. The approach that we have in terms of capturing the impact as well as the monitoring evaluation is to get all our partners together, get our monitoring and evaluation partner in one room to basically go through that entire thing to get a complete buy-in. I think Sudhakar mentioned a very important point that the top-down approach in this sector will only take you to a certain point. It cannot take you to, they cannot have the desired impact that one is looking at. So I think a collaborative approach where both sides have to come together, I think that's something which has worked. I'll give you a success story in this, that today of the 96 NGOs that we work with, we have several of them actually hiring the M&E partners separately for their other programs, not because of anything else, but because that's helped them raise funds. So that's actually helped them strengthen their governance system, strengthen their own monitoring and evaluation and impact assessment, which has helped them again to raise funds further. So therefore, I think it's important to get that framework ready. A common framework is very, very important by vertical. So that's something which is going to be critical in the work that we do. I'll just touch upon one more thing, Uma, which in fact Sudhakar mentioned, in terms of the community connect. For organization, say for Dabur, the advantages, they can work with, say, with various causes or various need areas, depending on what the community needs. For us as an organization, we may have very specific verticals, like we'll do skilling, or we're doing in environmental sustainability, say we're doing water or sanitation. But in everything, it's important to get the community buy-in. Even in skilling, the big challenge that is there in the country today is that you cannot get a youth and say, okay, you learn retail or you learn hospitality. It's extremely important to assess and understand the interest, because otherwise, again, it's not going to be sustainable over a long-term period. So therefore, that community, even that is part of the ecosystem development. So not to be top-down, but to have a more collaborative approach. Like we, as from the families that we came from, the middle-class families, we got our education and we knew what the choices were. So therefore, it's important to give their choices to the thing, make them understand, assess their skills, and then intervene accordingly. So that's another point I wanted to bring in while developing a program.
Okay. Thank you, Aloka. We will now turn to Shanta. Can you throw some light on these collaborative initiatives that you spoke about, building a network of schools, working with different universities? All of this takes a lot of effort and a lot of time goes into building that framework. So can you talk us through what are the challenges that you have faced? And some partnerships have worked, and some partnerships you might have decided along the way they are not going to work for you. So how have you, what has been your journey so far in terms of building this kind of collaborative partnership for meeting your own objectives, which will be impactful?
So Uma, very clearly we have, first of all, a very well-defined 5-year strategy for CSR. CSR is big business. Okay, for us, when I say it's a big business, we are committed to do CSR as a socially responsible organization. For me, fortunately, because I head HR as well, this is not disjointed at the organization level itself. So first and foremost, we've started with putting this as one of our objectives in the goal sheet from top down. Everybody carries CSR, community as a cause, on their goal sheets, and they all have to meet those requirements. So whenever we decide that we want to work with a particular NGO, we first start with what we call employee engagement. Then we do a 1-year commitment. There's some music playing in the background. So we do
sorry,
a 1-year.
That's my clock. Sorry for that.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's not a problem. Yeah, it's good to hear music other than my voice once in a while, Aloka. I'm sure my team members who dialed in are happier listening to the music than me. So it's okay. So just coming back, so for us, I think the collaboration and the power of aggregation, I think it's a very important tool that we just ignore. So let me tell you, Ashoka University, if I'm funding for the underprivileged, I'm funding FFE for the underprivileged. I'm setting up a school. I am now tying up with NES for creating masks. I mean, all of you independently come to me at various points of time. The basic intelligence that I need to apply, because I'm working with so many of you, is to get everyone to collaborate. Now, what are the successes? If the outcome is to make a child sustainable for a livelihood for the future, which is part of my strategy, because 75% of the money that I give as grants or as donations or whatever terminology we want to use, the fact is that these people have to be sustainable for the future. Your basic intelligence tells you that you cannot support somebody just till 10th standards and then leave them for fending on their own, because then you have to talk to the parents to tell them, I see value in your child. So let me tell you one of the stories that we tied up. We support this Udbhav RBL school in Hyderabad. Now this school is largely a girls' school, and we landed up with kids coming out of 10th standard. We actually met the Telangana University, and we used the IIM Ahmedabad chapter to connect with senior people there, and now we are supporting them for 11th and 12th as well. Now, what happens after 12th standard with these kids? Because my objective is to make them sustainable. And therefore, Ashoka came in, and therefore, FFE came in, and therefore, I'm now investing a part of the proceeds towards setting up an incubation center for these schools with Agastya. So I've set up an incubator. So what I'm saying is that all NGOs we support at an organization level. I can have a laundry list of 50 of them whom I keep on monitoring, or I just start scaling them down to a particular level to say, what is the outcome I'm expecting out of this? And therefore, as a 5S strategy, and I'm using the term, is the aspirational districts, which is your segment. So I have something called spatial, which is my geography. I have something called segmentation. What is the segment of population that I'm going to? What is the synergy that I'm expecting out of doing all this? What kind of support am I going to give all these people? So when I look at all of these and start bracketing, I see a lot of initiatives which are identical. So if I talk to a small school and say, I want to, support you till 5th standard, and then I have a larger school, which is probably 5th to 10th, why would I not bring two entities together? So from a success standpoint, I think we've been lucky when minds meet. The unsuccessful piece, and Uma, you've been subjected to it, right? There are sometimes we are interested in the real outcome. If you recall, we were trying to create a sewing, class with a bunch of people in Gujarat, and there was so much of resistance from NGOs to work together. While we are forthcoming, I think the biggest problem is that individually we are great, but together when we want to bring people in, I think the egos, the attitudes, and as a corporate, I can't be focusing on settling egos of people. Ultimately, it is impact to community and the final leg. So I think from a success standpoint, we've been lucky. But from a challenge standpoint, I think NGOs and partners need to understand that you are here for the impact for community. And we can't run away from that. Each of us, cannot be in a powerful role. All of us have roles to play. So I think from a success standpoint, I'll still hold power of aggregation, collaboration, which Aloka also mentioned, as very, very critical for us to be successful in impacting community. Otherwise, they're just isolated activities, feel good. As long as I'm on the chair, I run few initiatives. But like Sudhakar mentioned, there is a board mandate for 4 legs which we support, and it has to be within those 4 pillars. I'm not moving out of those 4 pillars, but we understand that they're all interchangeable. So if I look at health, education, women empowerment, and sustainability, any program of mine does cover all 4. Directly or indirectly, I do see an impact coming through, and that works beautifully for me amongst the multiple NGOs that I work. When I see that NGOs are difficult to work under power of aggregation, I'd like to be very honest that we have weeded out these NGOs over a period of time. Because for us, impact to community is our forerunner, not power to NGOs. That's not the going in for RBL Bank, not at all.
Okay. Thanks, Shanta, for expanding on that question. I'd like to pose the same question that I just asked Sudhakar. So you spoke very nicely about the 4 legs of, rather the CSR objectives of RBL Bank. I'd like you to reflect upon the business objectives or the organization objectives of RBL Bank and the CSR objectives, the 4 pillars that you've come up with. How are these two connected? And how are you therefore looking at building an ecosystem to meet both these objectives? Because both these objectives are anyway connected with one another.
Sure.
So
there are, sorry,
Sorry,
Sudhakar.
Shanta, please go on.
Were you asking this to Sudhakar? I thought
No, to you,
to
you.
me.
And I said, I asked Sudhakar this question earlier, and I would like
I know you did.
Yeah.
I know you did. So let me tell you, there's something called financial literacy. Okay. Now, financial literacy, our business units spend their own money to do financial literacy. I'm not going to write out any money from CSR for financial literacy in the organization because it's a business objective. And I think, like he said, learning English sometimes is the primary going in for some people from a communication standpoint. All of these expenses are borne by business, and we have a very clear understanding. When it comes to our CSR objectives and sustainability and livelihood, so let's take examples of lending to an SHG. Okay, because that is a financial objective. I am not going to cover that under my CSR expenses by just giving somebody to set up a business and not having an impact which is clearly completion. So that's the time we work very closely with our business partners to say that this is a woman empowerment initiative that I'm running under the CSR model. The person's income today is 10,000 rupees. I intend to move that to 40,000 rupees. But if I have to move that 40,000 to 1 lakh rupees, that individual, that woman who's empowered needs to move to actually taking a loan from and in the SHG model. I will not be in a position to move 60% of my budget towards that objective, even though it's a CSR objective. So we are very clear on the metrics that we are going to be watching people for. And that's how we do our monitoring and evaluation. And if that particular woman who is empowered needs more funds, that person will have to go through the business objectives. This is one. The second thing is that if our business, so let's take the COVID era. I'm sure you'd have asked this question. I'm sorry, I'm preempting it a little earlier.
No problem.
Let's look at the COVID era. Okay, COVID era said, and we are bankers. So we were essential services. We've been going to work every day. And our BCs, which are our business correspondents, have been working non-stop since April without this work from home concept, because ultimately it's the last leg. What do you think we did? We asked our NGOs, and you know that, Uma, very well, to create 60,000 masks for us. These NGOs overnight were skilled to make masks and were cleared by the hospital to make sure it was a 3-layered mask. And we eventually gave it to our BCs who used it. Now, that was a business expense for all practical purposes. I think this collaboration in business has worked. The third example that I like to throw out is that we do a lot of, we take a lot of deposits from large governmental institutions. Now, governmental institutions do have, when you look at a PPE partnership, public-private partnership, CSR combined with a business objective tends to be a great opportunity for us to fund. And over these last 6-8 months, we have done a lot of funding in PPEs. So we have done a lot of collaboration with the municipal corporations and other government entities to ensure that we have a final leg, both in ambulances, X-ray machines, you name it. And, we've done that for the community over the last 8-9 months. So I think when we work with business, we work for enhancing revenue of our women-empowered policies and women-empowered programs. So that's how we function at the bank.
Okay. Yeah, so that's really great to know how the organization objectives and CSR objectives, how they are balanced and support one another. Now, I think we are coming close to the end time of this session, but we have another 5-6 minutes. And I would like to use this time to basically reach out to each one of you and ask you to highlight from your own perspective of making your own CSR programs much more effective and being able to achieve your overall objectives. What are the 2 or 3 things that you would like to see better in the ecosystem that you are building? Starting with Aloka, please.
Yeah. So, Uma, I think, we are in the post-pandemic situation. I think we're looking at 3 things, if I can. So I think we're looking at preparedness, which is going to be a very, very key factor for us because we work on long-term programs. And therefore, the ability of the nonprofit that we are working with or the partner we are working with, preparedness is going to be very, very important. The second is technology. I think that's going to be an imperative now. So how you use technology, that's something. It's not going to be easy. It's never easy, but how we do it is, that's another one. And third is adaptability in terms of thing. The other thing that we would like to do is, of course, work with our partners because we're focusing a lot on business continuity. This is something which is a term that we use internally for our, as a bank or a financial institution or a company, but it's not something which is there in the nonprofit sector. So we are working with our partners. It's not easy because the challenges there are much, much higher. Then there are cost issues, etc. But I think some amount of business continuity is something that we're also going to look at as a thing. The other last thing, there's a huge shift in terms of, to what Shanta also just mentioned. For HSBC, we are, CSR is part of our overall corporate sustainability strategy. So for us, the two pillars are actually quite in synergy with the work that we do. Future skills, as we call it, a skill development, is very, very important because, what we see the shift currently is that jobs everywhere, the entire skilling space is going to go through a change. I think be it for companies, like for all of us, if there's no self-learning, because a lot of jobs will become redundant in the BFSI sector. So I think we are focusing a lot internally on future skills, building your own skills to be relevant. And I think a similar thing we look forward also in our portfolio. That's something that we will see. I think in the next phase of HSBC Skills for Life, that's something that we'll bring in. And in our environmental sustainability portfolio, we are looking at energy transition and nature-based solutions. So just Shanta mentioned, as a financial institution, we're going to keep it very separate from business. But at the same time, there will be a major focus for business to lend in these areas as they feel appropriate. And we will be working, of course, separately on grant programs.
Okay, great to know that. Thank you, Aloka. Sudhakar, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would like to see changed in the ecosystem that you're trying to build to meet your own CSR plans?
One is, Uma, in terms of the impact. See, whatever we do, there has to be positive impact on the communities. Every year, we keep taking one aspect of the work which we do. Through an external agency, we conduct an impact study. We want to increase the number of such impact studies at least to 2 in the next coming year. That is with regard to the impacts. The second is, in terms of coming to specific areas of work which you do on sustainability. One is on water. We are doing projects in Rajasthan already. Like Mr. Deshpande pointed out, we are doing a large project in Rajasthan. The next project, which in the financial year 2021, which we'll be taking up, is on solar support in villages, both for the communities and also even for the street lighting. Third, in terms of geographies, we are already in 7 states with our own CSR team. We would like to see, can we extend for 2-3 more states? These are 2-3 things which we are planning more effectively in the future.
Okay. Over to you, Shanta, for the last word.
Okay, so I would be, I'm just worried about digital learning, because education is a very important going in for me. And I have committed, because that's part of the Sustainable Livelihood Program, where 75% of my monies are put in. So obviously for me, digital and digital investments will be the long-term, worry. Technology and adoption of technology by NGOs and underprivileged people is something that I am very grappling with right now. When we do these Zoom calls, etc., in the privileged centers, we suffer with broadband and all sorts of issues on network. How am I going to educate this last mile child with the right kind of technology, right kind of digital learning, and right kind of impact assessment, where I can actually calculate the SROI, ultimately, the social return on investment? I think those will be some of my challenges, and the changing face of talent for CSR. Other than these 4 things, from the physical world moving to a virtual world in this new COVID pandemic, which is here for at least a couple of years, and a lot of learnings out of this, it leaves me a little worried as to what the future would look like. What I'm happy to say is that the community is still adapting faster, And I think that's what makes it very encouraging for us. But the investments are going to be very, very huge to move to a complete digital training and digital learning environment for the underprivileged. I think that's where I'm a little concerned.
Okay, thank you, Shanta. So that brings us to the end of this session. We have several fascinating takeaways, particularly on what has worked and what has not worked. What are their priorities? How do large corporates think about collaboration and particularly marry the organization objectives with CSR objectives and make things work on the ground? And how do they finally cope with the dynamic scenarios, whether it's COVID, whether it's technology, whether it is making wanting to make more impact. So I'm sure that all of these insights would be helpful for all of you out there who have been part of this call. And I'm sure the recording will also be available for those of you who would like to share it with others. Thank you very much, Shanta, Aloka, and Sudhakar for making the time and being with us today. It was a fantastic session. It was great to interact with all of you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uma. And let me just take a minute and then hand it back to Professor Mani for the closing words. But I really think this session was fascinating because thank you very much, Shanta, for bringing in the whole concept of the triple bottom line. Because I think organizations like yours, HSBC, Dabur, were really focused on doing work. They really see it as three streams. I mean, I ran Zensar entirely on the basis of triple bottom line. And I remember in the initial years, it used to be difficult to convince. I mean, obviously we were a publicly listed company and people said, look, we're only interested in profits. I said, you'll get your profits, buddy, but let's focus on people and planet as well. And not to, as you rightly said, to give an avenue for further profits to be created, independent tracks, but there is a synergy that ultimately happens. I think the point you made on technology, absolutely well taken. I remember the first time we used technology was using virtual reality. When we got a slum child to walk into one of the skills lighthouses in Pune, and you talk to the person and say, oh, you can be a nursing assistant in Jahangir Hospital, doesn't believe you. But you let him put on virtual reality headsets, transport him into the operating theater of Jahangir Hospital, and he sees somebody who looks like him taking the pressure, helping the doctor. And he says, Are wo kar sakte hai, to main bhi kar sakta hu. And I think that is the beauty of using commonly available technology uncommonly well. So I think there's so much available. And as all of you said, I mean, the beauty of being in the corporate sector and supporting socialists, there's so much you can bring to the table. And hopefully there's also so much you can learn. Mr. Ganpati, thank you for your closing comment where he mentioned that it's amazing to get a 360-degree view of social through veterans, practitioners, etc. And thank you, because that's exactly what Mani and I set out to achieve and said, let's, it's almost like watching a 3-hour Raj Kapoor movie. At the end of it, you feel entertained. So we said, let's entertain, enlighten, and educate. I know it's a tough task for 3 hours, but hopefully we made that happen to some extent for you. Over to you, Mani.
Thank you so much, Ganesh, and a very, very special mention of our panel chairpersons, Mark, Louis, and Uma, for really practicing punctuality. Now, this is something we always preach in corporates and everywhere else. We always boast that we start on time, but I think very few people can say that we also end on time. And hats off to all of you for so passionately sharing every bit of what you have done, achieved over the years. If I were to quickly look at what were some of the key words that people would have learned today, they would be, it's compassion, which is so very important in this entire journey. It's not compliance one should be worried about, but it is the commitment that one should be focusing upon. Let's not look at the greed. Let's focus on the need. And maybe one can evolve a formula where we can not only be happy, but make the lives of people around us happier. And that's where I thought this point about outcomes being more important than output is something all of us will sustain in our minds for time to come. Thank you, everyone. I think I'm being given the credit unduly. All the credit is due to Ganesh for having created this entire program for us. It was very easy for me to practice what we call wholehearted delegation, but here it was delegating upwards. So I just passed it on to him and he said, this is the program and this is the wonderful people who are going to tell us great stories of what they achieved in their own organizations. Thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts, particularly from BMA. This is the first time we attempted a CSR conclave on the digital platform. And I'm glad to say that we started with 85 participants in the beginning. As Ganesh rightly said in the beginning, you can walk in and walk out because there is an overconfidence that video to milega baad mein. I only want to reiterate that the video will be going live exactly 1 week from now on the BMA YouTube channel. And this already hosts about 40 videos of various events that we have organized over the last 6 months. You're welcome to log in there and register once. Don't worry, there are no charges. This is something we are doing for the benefit of the community. And you will also see the CSR Conclave videos over there. Thank you, everyone. And as we do in BMA Parampara, let's put on our cameras for a group photo. We have, of course, been capturing the photos of all the speakers, but I think it's also a good idea to get all the participants so that we can have a collage of all those who attended this program with us right from 5 p.m. onwards. We started saying good evening, and I think we're almost at the verge of saying good night, but let's have that 1 minute extra to put on your cameras. We have a very efficient digital team of photographers. They are my BMA secretariat staff who do a wonderful job in capturing the images. Incidentally, as we were in this session, across social media, all the speakers, panelists were being featured respectively after each session. So you can check it up on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook later on. So as Shanta was saying somewhere else, I think we have adapted to digital as a way of life because that was the only way perhaps we could reach our members. Please display some digital patience as we move across the 3 screens and capture the images of all of us who are present. May I request the one odd person whose names are only visible and not faces, thoda mukh darshan dijiye, so that we can have your picture also.
Professor, you're behaving like a true professor.
Well, unfortunately, I thought professors never stop talking. But all right, we are done with screen 1. Thank you, everybody, and a very, very special thanks again to Ganesh. I'm looking forward to have some more such sessions. I'd like to also thank our past presidents, many of them who are present here this evening and encouraged us by their presence in all these efforts that we are making on behalf of the Bombay Management Association. As we move from lockdown to unlock, still continue to stay safe, stay blessed. Good night, and have a great weekend. Thank you.